57. Chapter 57, Second Task. The four champions were led down to the docks on the Black Lake, where Minister for Magic Crouch, Ludo Bagman Director for Magical Sport, and the three headmasters all waited the four champions. Fleur de Lacre noted the hungry photographers, all waiting for Fleur to show her swim suit for the task, and suppressed her sneer. English, French, the reporters were all the same. All they wanted from her was more skin and more scandal. The fact that she was already a witch far beyond any of their hopes and dreams to equal did not matter. She was pretty and soon to be displayed in a bathing suit, and it is all they and the public cared about. Headmistress Maxim towered over all of them and gave Fleur a nod. She would prove her worth. If this challenge was harder for her than for any of the rest, she would just have to work twice as hard to win it anyway. Victor Crumb noted Headmaster Karkarov's vicious smile directed at him, not the false Barnaby he usually slapped on when he was kissing Crumb's ass to make sure his star pupil knew just how much his headmaster was behind him. This was the smug smile that he showed those his cruelty was let loose upon. No one who had met Karkarov doubted the rumors of him being a Death Eater in the war. Crumb was not sure why Karkarov dared to smile at his own champion that way now, but he was sure he would not like it. Harry came down to the docks and looked over at the stands. Looking to the family guest sections, he saw Sirius, Narcissa, Griphook, Fangborn as expected. He glanced at Hufflepuff and noted Neville, and Hermione were both there. Hermione was glaring at him and unwrapping a scarf from around her neck, wiggling it, then pointing at the lake. Hermione had been prepared. She had her bathing suit on under her clothes. She had gillyweed grown specially by Neville to be extra potent in her pocket potion belt to deal with all the other champions and all the hostages in the event something went wrong. Hermione was not under Black Lake being a hostage, but in the stands. Griphook and Fangborn were in the stands, as was Sirius. Who was missing? Harry went cold. Hermione had unwrapped her scarf and wiggled it. Noodle. Where was Noodle? Harry reached through his familiar band and got only the sense that he was sleeping. This was bad. Noodle was under water. Would potions even work on a snake? Noodle could only use mind magic and some related charms like Notice Me Not and invisibility. He couldn't exactly cast a bubblehead charm. Noodle could swim under water for several minutes, but the challenge was over an hour long. Harry gripped his wand and fingered his knife. Again, he wasn't allowed to bring anything else in that was magical. Luckily, Millicent and Neville had been making him work inside the cold waters of the Black Lake every day, learning to identify and harvest the active portion of gillyweed. Harry thought he was close to Newt levels of underwater herb identification and harvesting, which was good because while he was allowed to bring whatever he wanted for himself to deal with the water problem, he was not allowed to bring anything for his hostages or the other champions. Luna had said the Banshee screamed, but did not cry. Someone was going to die today, but not a child. Harry had decided it would not be a hostage or champion either. Harry turned to look at Cedric. The Hogwarts champion, his Quidditch captain and Hufflepuff prefect, looked like a man being led to his execution. He looked defeated before the challenge even began. Cedric looked up at the sound of his father, Amos Diggory. Amos shouted out to his son, cheering him on, telling him how proud he was of Cedric. Each word hit Cedric like a bludger, causing him to reel back, his face a hot mess of embarrassment, fear, and no little anger. Amos Diggory's face looked confused. Barty Crouch stepped to the stage, looking far too energetic for the stoic and serious Minister for Magic. He grinned at the gathered champions and audience. Touching his throat with his wand, he cast his sonorous, and his voice boomed over the festivities. Witches, wizards, and lesser species like reporters, it fills me with no small amount of joy to welcome you to the second task of the Triwizard Cup. You will note the 4 large mirrors set in front of the stands. These are matched with mirrors in Durmstrang, Beauxbatons, and at our own Diagon Alley, where the Ministry has funded a temporary theatre, so all wizarding Britain can see each champion in their life and death battle beneath the waves, and more importantly, the swimsuit competition. Dumbledore and Madame Maxim tried to grab Minister Crouch's arm to censor the minister, but Crouch ignored them, letting his security detail bar the angry headmaster and headmistress as Crouch continued talking. I know we're all looking to see the amazing display of witchly, talents that the Beauxbatons champion will have for us. Good thing the lake is cold, or the other champions might embarrass themselves. Barty Crouch leered and licked his lips. In the audience, Mad Eye Moody began to frown. That was not the Crouch he was used to seeing. Granted, the vicious old geezer had a staff up his ass that could double as a ship's mast, but he had never been anything but proper, to the point of prim. Alistair had locked up Barty Crouch Jr. and knew where he had seen that lipping twitch before. If Alistair didn't know Barty Crouch Jr. died in Azkaban, he would swear that he was looking at him again. Maybe the old man's finally going soft in the head, and whatever rot existed in his son was finally coming to the surface. Still, Alistair would watch him. Keeping an eye on someone he wasn't looking at was harder, now that his real eye was growing back, but it was a skill he had only improved with the magic eye. It didn't rely on it. Minister Crouch pointed to the view screens. If you will cast your eyes upon the screen, you will see the hostages for our champions. They have 1 hour to retrieve their hostage, 1 hour in which the stasis spell of Headmaster Dumbledore will hold them safe beneath the waves. At the end of the hour, the stasis breaks, and any champion not recovered will be trapped dozens of meters beneath the lake, far from light, far from hope, far from air. Minister Crouch grinned and licked his lips at the thought. For our first champion, Fleur de Lacquer of Beaubaton, little 8-year-old Gabrielle, her baby sister, sleeps beneath the waves. Will her sister come to her rescue, or will we all watch in horror as the stasis fails, and pretty little Gabrielle fights for air, chained to her stake in the merman village at the bottom of the Black Lake? The mirror now showed a sleeping blonde child in a pretty dress, chained with links of dull bronze to a stout wooden post driven deep into the lake bed. The girl's eyes were closed, and she did not breathe. Gabby. Fleur yelled, then dropped her robe to stand in a blue one-piece swimsuit that flattered her form, and a flat black wand holster strapped to her right wrist. She glared at the judges, impatient to be off to rescue her sister. The photographers went mad, snapping so many pictures the flash threatened to outshine the sun as the crowd cheered the image of Fleur replacing her sister, the magical camera, eyes moving around the Villa beauty like a modeling display. Her face, however, remained fierce and angry. Barty Crouch gave a wolf whistle that had more than a few heads turning in disapproval to glare at him, but the Minister for Magic carried on unconcerned. For our Durmstrang champion, the Quidditch superstar Victor Crumb, what witch could hope to capture his heart? None, for Victor Crumb is a mama's boy. Say hello to Mommy, Victor. Don't be late, or she might meet a cute merman and leave your father. Barty laughed as the image of a late 40s woman in simple jeans and a sweater hung unmoving from the post, her resemblance to Crumb easily marking her as the boy's mother. Crumb's face snapped to the minister, and while he neither spoke nor made any gesture, the minister flinched from the feeling of the champion's magic, transmitting his desire to do violence and even death to the British minister. Crumb dropped his robes and stood in what looked like a muggle dry suit, running from elbow to knee and made from some sort of black fabric. He turned to face the lake, poised like a wolf, prowling the limits of the ward, keeping him from its surface. Cedric looked at Minister Crouch, who smirked back at him. Cast your eyes on the third mirror witches and wizards. The Hogwarts champion, the Hufflepuff golden boy, the hear and heart throb of every witch in the Hogwarts upper years, and no few among the female teaching staff all want to know which witch has captured his heart. I see our Department of Magical Creatures head Amos Diggory is here, ready to find out if Cedric has left out any updates about potential marriage partners and future mothers of the Diggory heir. Sorry, Amos. It turns out Cedric's most precious one is none other than Ravenclaw Quidditch captain and star chaser, Roger Davis. Sorry, Amos. Odds of him bearing your Diggory heir look bleak. Minister Crouch smirked as he watched Amos Diggory's face shatter, disbelief giving rise to a black and terrible anger. While Cedric was universally admired, Amos Diggory had stalled in his current position due to his deeply prejudiced nature. Among his particular hatreds were magical creatures that did not know their place, those including goblins, house elves, werewolves, and centaurs. Other than that, his hatred was reserved for dark wizards and sexual deviants, which was how he described any witch or wizard who did not marry one of the opposite gender right out of Hogwarts and live in eternal heterosexual monogamy until death. No one in Hufflepuff, and indeed no one who had any family working in the Ministry of Magic in any capacity, had any doubt that Cedric had never dared to tell his father that he was dating Roger Davis from Ravenclaw, even though the other boy was nearly his equal in academics, athletics, and birth status. To Amos Diggory, who had Cedric's future planned to the last detail, there was no room for a gay son in the carefully crafted plan to make his son the future head of Wizarding Britain, with a bride of a family even higher in status than their own family. Cedric dropped his robes to stand revealed in long shorts that had one black leg and one gold leg, with a wand holster on his right hip. He turned his face away from his screaming father and towards the Black Lake. Harry Potter walked over to Cedric and gripped his shoulder. The embarrassed Diggory turned to look at Harry, who jerked up his chin in silent signal for Cedric to stop looking down. Harry spoke loud enough to be heard by the sound amplification charms on the platform, and his words washed over the crowd, drowning out Minister Crouch's ill-mannered laughter. "Cedric, you are my captain, my prefect, the champion not of Hufflepuff, but of Hogwarts. That is one of ours down there, and you are going to get him back. This is just another match. You keep your head on a swivel, your eyes on the prize, and win like you always do," Harry said, ignoring the mix of cheers and boos coming from the audience. Wizarding Britain was somewhere in the last century when it came to gender roles and identity, which was odd because magic sometimes altered your body in ways far stranger than gender swaps frequently enough that they had no excuse for their parochial attitude. Barty Crouch pointed his wand to the last mirror. "What have we here for the famous boy who lived, who loves him enough to be selected by the Goblet of Fire to be his hostage?" The picture flashed to a black rock viper with shining silver runes bound by bronze chain to a post deep in the bottom of Black Lake. Minister Crouch shook his head in mock despair. "I know Harry Potter was raised by goblins and starved for proper human affection, but he doesn't have a single friend, family member, girlfriend, or I guess even boyfriend who cares about him enough for the Goblet of Fire to detect. Instead, it had to take a pet, and a snake at that. Oh well, Harry, at least yours is easier to replace. Do put in an effort anyway, or the goblet will eat your soul. Let the second challenge begin." Minister Crouch shouted, and with a wave of his wand, started the countdown clock and dropped the ward, stopping the champions hitting the lake. Harry dropped his robes, and Hogwarts, its assembled guests and dignitaries, and all the viewing audiences around Wizarding Europe were treated to Harry Potter in a golden thong. Woven of actual gold, Hermione had given Fangborn and glitter-bright fashion magazines from Italy detailing the latest and most daring male swimsuits, along with the very clear statement that the headmaster and minister for magic want Harry to properly represent conservative wizarding values. Obviously, the answer for the goblin matriarch and Harry's goblin sister was to make him a gold-woven thong that bared as much of his cheeks as was legal, and presented his assets in such a way as to improve their odds at non-basilisk grandchildren or nieces and nephews. Harry put his wand on his throat, touched his wand to his throat, and cast Sonorous. Harry pointed to his left ass cheek and gave it a slap. "Kiss my goblin ass, minister." Taking the gillyweed from his robe pocket, he chewed it a few times and dove into the lake as he felt the gills form on his neck. With his arms and legs adopting the transformation halfway between full merfolk and human, Harry's body adapted to the water totally, his eyes and ears reshaping to interpret the light and sound beneath the lake, even as his limbs reshaped themselves for powerful swimming like a sea lion. He cut through the water like an arrow, not towards the merfolk village, but down to the first dock, where the light changed from the overworld's pure sunlight to the dark green of perfect jade, the light with which magical plants that were free from the mortal energy of the light could grow in water, mana, and earth, taking only that light that had been bent to the will and nature of water to nourish itself. He harvested gillyweed by the bunch and tucked it into the clever loops on his bathing suit. Harry had counted on its scandalous brevity being all the judges would see, not the spatial expansion loops at each hip that he now filled with fresh harvested gillyweed to transform whoever needed it. He gathered enough for each champion and hostage, then holstering his wand and goblin silver dagger, he began swimming slowly after the other champions. He was a goblin warrior, deep in enemy territory. Enemies unknown, he would be just another shadow in the deep until all the threats were revealed. Minister of Magic's box. Barty Crouch turned to his aide, Dolores Umbridge, and cast a quick spell on her. Crucio. Barty cast the unforgivable and watched his father's chosen instrument writhe in agony at his feet, smiling as the half-dozen auras of his personal protection detail watched their precious Minister for Magic cast the unforgivable torture curse on a ministry under secretary and do nothing. That was the beauty of the imperious curse. If you got access to truly secure areas and started with enough authority to isolate your targets of choice, taking over even the minister's own entourage was ridiculously easy. Barty leaned down and patted Dolores' cheeks. "Dolores, do you mind if I call you Dolores?" Barty asked, then crucioed her again because he really didn't care. "Dolores, I have no choice but to let the boy who lived not only live, but put on a properly heroic show. I really want to kill him. He mocked me, Dolores. He dared to mock me in front of all the wizarding world. Granted, he thought he was mocking my father, but still, he was mocking me. The Dark Lord needs him alive and unhurt until the last challenge, and it was your job to whip him into being a good little ministry lapdog before that happens." Barty stood up, went to cast a third curse, and realized as soon as the last one finished, Dolores had gone unconscious. "Oh, bother, not a lot of fun, that one. My father can't even select durable toads. Probably better off as a tree, all things considered. Still, I do get to watch the extra Hogwarts Hufflepuff die. Merlin, but it will be fun to offer Amos Diggory my condolences for the loss of his son, then rub it in his face that the last words Amos had spoken to him were screaming about being gay. He may bust a vein and die in front of all the reporters." It had taken a lot of work to reprogram the ministry drones, the swimming automatons that broadcast the live feed back from the champions to the mirrors above the surface. The only reason Barty had been able to work the magic at all was the Death Eater masks and Dark Marks both contained a magical code key in Parcel Magic that, if used together, would allow Death Eaters to pass through the anti-teleport and anti-portkey wards of Morsemorder, Lord Voldemort's own spell to put the Dark Mark above the sky of his targets, both trapping them and marking them. With Lord Voldemort himself available, Barty had been able to adapt that sorcery to make the drones not see the Death Eaters Barty had sent to make sure that Victor Crumb, the half-blood, and his Muggle mother, along with Cedric Diggory and his Ravenclaw lover, died tragic deaths, allowing only the heroic Harry Potter and the beautiful Fleur de Lacre to survive. Fleur was to die in the third task to demonstrate how amazing Harry was to survive it. The devil, as his Dark Lord put it, was in the details, and Lord Voldemort was the devil. Two champions would die this day, for in the end, only Harry Potter must stand, the undisputed champion of the wizarding world. Only then will his death at the hands of a reborn Lord Voldemort be a fitting sacrifice and tribute to the Dark Lord's second coming. Barty just loved it when things went right. He put his feet up on the whimpering form of Dolores Umbridge, then sat back to enjoy the show. Victor Crumb, approaching the merfolk village Victor, had gone with partial human transfiguration. As an animagi, he had a much greater understanding of human-animal transfiguration than most. He had used this to partially transform himself into a bull shark. His torso and neck were marked with the gills of the only large predator shark species that thrived in fresh water, and he bore its shark's head, dorsal fin and tail. His arms remained human, and his wand was in his holster. He could only use chantless wanded magic down below the sea, but surface sounds could not invoke spells properly in water anyway, so his lack of human vocal cords did not matter. His mother was a muggle. If she was down here when the stasis faded, she would drown. No spell or magic potion meant for witches would work on her, as she had no internal magic to fuel it. Karkaroff must have known she was a muggle, and determined to use this to accidentally remove his champion's unfortunate tie to muggles, and free him to be rebranded as a properly pure-blooded champion. Crumb noted that if his mother died, Karkaroff would follow her into the grave. The mermen of the village boiled up to oppose him. The Death Eaters who hung back had imperieused the mermen to attack without hesitation mercy. Unfortunately for them, Crumb saw them swim between his mortal mother and him, and had neither hesitation or mercy to spare either. The charging mermen with their tridents were used to being the apex predator of the deep waters, as the Kraken of Hogwarts rarely bothered with lesser beings. They knew their mastery over wizards in the ocean depths, and while this was normally true, it was not just false with the Death Eaters, but Victor Crumb. A seeker lives in a three-dimensional world full of fast-moving threats. The only protection he had was his senses and reflexes. Victor Crumb was not actually the most agile seeker on the international stage, but he thought faster and held better situational awareness than his peers. The reaction speed deficit he made up with hard-trained strength, forcing his broom into harder turns than anyone could match, not through blinding speed, but from faster thinking and ruthless and unhesitating application of brute force. As an experienced animagi, he was not helpless in a strange body, but a master at functioning with senses human beings were not born with. While not a shark by nature, he had trained ruthlessly once the underwater nature of the task had been made clear, and if his awareness was not as natural as the mermen, his teeth matched everything but the trident's reach, and Victor had a wand. Exeliomus was a basic disarming charm. As a duelist, he had been drilled to cast it both chantlessly with a wand and wandless with the chant, allowing him to either silently cast or cast with his offhand to surprise his enemies. The mermen were surprised when the bull shark they charged to fight began to blast their tridents and nets from their hands, then tear through them with the terrible shredding teeth of a shark. The blood of the merman was an emerald green in the strange light of the deeps, but the cold eyes of Victor Crumb noted only targets, threats and obstacles between him and his mother. In the merman village, 4 Death Eaters snarled in their masks which served as bubblehead charms, drew their wands, and moved to intercept. Never trust a subhuman with work that belonged to their betters. Trusting that their Dark Lord's magic would shield them from detection by the hovering drones, they discussed briefly their strategy, then began to cast, using verbal and wand movements, as the amount of mass they had to affect was large, and the amount of energy they needed to manipulate was frightening. Still, only Voldemort's own Death Eaters would dare to covert that much of the Black Lake into ice, entombing the Durmstrang champion in an iceberg. The last sight of the shark would be his dear Muggle mother, hanging on the post where she would drown when the hour was up, long before he melted free. Crumb moved through the mermen with deliberate savagery, knowing that shock and awe would drive them before him like prey, before they could see if their numbers trumped his wand and shark body. There was little between him and his mother save the dark jade of the Black Lake when the shock of cold hit his skin. The bull shark had been chosen because it tolerated fresh water, but it was a tropical shark, a cold-blooded animal. Crumb could feel body and mind growing slow and unresponsive. He drove his tail to push him farther and faster, past the unnatural cold pool, but it was vast beyond his worst nightmare, and now his thoughts grew sluggish. He tried to cast his most powerful finite incanto silently, but with his wand. Against whoever had cast this killing cold, it was not enough. Crumb felt his vision going black. Cedric Diggory, Cedric had his packages of gillyweed ready, but as he was rather more flexible as a mage with incantations and wand than with either chantless or wandless magic, Cedric had gone for the bubblehead charm. Diving for the floor of the Black Lake, Cedric cast Aqua Eructo with his wand pointed behind him. He was so glad he had taken care of magical creatures past his owl level. The study of kraken, or giant squid, had taught Cedric how some magical water creatures use jets of water to blast themselves through the sea faster than most swimming fish. Using a constant and controlled blast of water from his wand, Cedric found himself more flying than swimming through the lake. Flying low over the weeds, Cedric hoped to remain concealed from whatever threats the ministry team had set up, and he knew no mermen would be close to the weeds due to fear of Grindylow attack. Cedric knew the headmaster could not negotiate with the Grindylow like he could the more intelligent mermen, so he knew they would not attack a wizard of obvious power who was moving too fast for mass pursuit. Cedric grinned as the Grindylow erupted from the weeds, too slow to catch him. He was a seeker, and speed had always been his best armor, at least, when he didn't have Potter and Longbottom, his beaters, to actively defend him. The Death Eaters posted in the weeds to control the Grindylows they maintained under Imperius were growing tired. Maintaining so many Imperius at once was draining, and the little green humanoids were so different from humans that the spell took more energy bending the slippery little beasts to their will. As Diggory, the target selected for them to kill, jetted past, they decided to intervene. A powerful, finite incanto came from the concealed Death Eaters and popped Cedric's bubblehead charm. Knowing he was under attack by wizards and unable to see the presumably disillusioned attackers, Cedric knew he needed concealment, as he doubted without incantation any spell of his could block their attacks, and he had little experience casting spells in water. Faking clutching his throat, Cedric let out a stream of bubbles as if he was drowning, covering his shoving gillyweed in his mouth. Chewing thoughtfully, he saw the grindalos charging and reviewed his magical options. Without chanting, which years of experience were required to do underwater, his spells were relatively low level. Again, care of magical creatures, bless Hagrid's oversized heart, came to his rescue. With a grin, a nod to the Weasley twins' constant pranking that made this spell chantlessly reflexive and almost effortless, Cedric began to cast Scourgify. Casting it at people would wash their mouths out with soap. Casting it at a creature that exchanged oxygen through gills or its skin would drown them as soap disrupted their exchange membranes. The horde of panicking and scattering grindalos were perfect cover. Cedric worked through a slow rune-based illusion spell, carving the rune in ice in the water itself. Cedric cast a disguise on himself that made him look like a grindalo, then cast a notice me not on himself to make him the least interesting grindalo in the swarm, and began slowly swimming towards the Mer village and Roger Davis. He better get boyfriend points for this. Fleur de Lacquer knifing through the water like the athlete that she was, Fleur was protected by her bubblehead charm and wrapped in a powerful invisibility charm. Whatever traps the English ministry had laid, she would simply avoid them. There was nothing she would permit to get between her and Gabrielle. She had gillyweed enough to save both of them, but if she used it on herself, she lost most of her magic. If she took too long to reach Gabrielle, then she would drown before Fleur could save her. Passing the Grindalo, she noted a great bowl of them thrashing around like they were dying. This brought Grindalo from all over and worried the Vila champion. Hundreds would be too many to face, even for her. She swam through the water with efficiency, trusting her invisibility to hide her from threats she could not waste time or magic fighting. The Death Eaters, exhausted from holding so many dying Grindalo on task while the Diggory boy drowned, could not find the boy's body. Searching frantically, because the boy had to be seen to die for the Dark Lord's purpose to be served, one of them saw a target his mask highlighted. Ivard Carnarvon was a Death Eater of pure but unremarkable blood, and while he was a decent fighter with his wand, his expertise was more surveillance and infiltration. He was one of the leading experts on the uses of the many charms Voldemort had woven into his Death Eater's masks. One of the best was the invisibility detection. Against a Death Eater in his mask, it was better to simply trust and notice me not to make yourself uninteresting. Actual invisibility may have been a flare to draw his attention. Ivard signaled his companions to begin directing their Grindalo to the new target, then blasted out a finite incantum with all his power. Fleur felt her bubblehead and her illusion spell fail, just as she noted the swarm of Grindalo coming from all directions. No, she would not permit it. Gabrielle's life depended on her. Fleur stuffed the gillyweed into her mouth and felt the gills form. Without chanting, she did not have spells enough to get through the Grindalo. Her allure was useless against them, if anything making her more a target. Her fire would not serve her so far below the hated water. Fleur had spent her whole life being told to always act human, never let her other self be seen. She had been half a Vila out of fear of humanity remembering Vila were more than just beautiful women with magical charm, but rather a kind of lesser fairy, a bird creature who used its allure and ability to adopt human form to prey upon and mate with human men trapped by their charm. Always pretend to be nothing but human, while Vila were exploited for their beauty. They were not destroyed as a species that began as one of the fairy races bred to prey upon humans. Fleur had accepted this until she had seen the little boy, Harry Potter, one with not a drop of human blood, proudly boasting and embracing his goblin identity in the face of his own headmaster and minister of magic's anger. Fleur was done pretending to be less than she was, half a Vila, a pretend human. They thought to take her magic away, lock her from the sky and fire, take her voice and her spells away. Fine. Let them find out what they hunted was no weak witch helpless without chanting magic. Fleur let the rage take her, let the change take her. Her head stretched into a powerful beak, her arms to half wings with her hands replaced by terrible winged talons. Her feet grew to be eagle claws half the size of a hippogriff, her wings driving her through the water like a osprey looking for fish. She met the rising cloud of Grindylow with beak and talon, and the water went dark with blood. The Death Eaters fought to keep control of themselves as the powerful allure of the most potent Vila in all of Europe sang its siren song to lure them to their deaths, sang for them to lay down all thoughts of doing anything but worshipping and adoring the terrible thing that danced amidst the dying Grindylow. Dividing their attention between resisting the magical allure of the Vila they were here to kill and tracking the same creature as it dove through schools of Grindylow like some sort of pint-sized aquatic dragon. They did not notice the small figure swimming up from behind. Harry Potter had no great list of spells he could cast silently. His list held very few of combat utility, mostly disarming knockback, which he didn't think would work underwater, the summoning charm, banishing charm, and a few first-year jinx. His most potent weapon was not actually a weapon at all. The simple notice me not charm made him the least interesting thing in its target's view. Given they were actively fighting the effects of Vila charm and tracking Fleur in the swirling knot of Grindylow, they could be forgiven missing Harry swimming up. Forgiven by anyone whose parents had not been murdered by Voldemort. Harry leaned back as he threw his whole body weight into cutting the rear wizard's throat. It took 4 more hacks before the head came off, and Harry tied it by its hair to his golden thong. Harry swam on to the next Death Eater. The remaining Death Eaters noticed many of their Grindylow bolting from combat as their controlling mind died, but didn't immediately suspect one of their own dying was the reason. One of the Death Eaters cast a stunner, the second a cutting curse, the third a blasting hex. The stunner nailed a Grindylow, which honestly got it out alive, as the cutting curse cut a second in half, even as the blasting hex set off an explosion that was far more damaging underwater. 2 Grindylow died, but Fleur and the closest Grindylow were stunned. The shouts of triumph of the Death Eaters died, as the second of their number had his throat cut by the silently swimming goblin, or boy, depending on whose bestiary you were looking Harry Potter up in today. The 2 remaining Death Eaters panicked and almost earned themselves the wrath of their Dark Lord as they both cast Avada Kedavra at the blood-covered figure swimming out of the dark. Harry, being much smaller than an adult, ducked behind the dying man, and as he was still dying, not dead, the 2 killing curses ripped Harry's victim's soul from his body in brutal overkill. Harry poked his wand around the corpse and disarmed the first Death Eater, who discovered losing a wand underwater was not like losing it above ground. It disappeared into the depths, its core heavier than water, and dragging the wand into the depths of the muck of the Scottish loch floor. The last Death Eater began sending stunners at Harry Potter, recalling the orders to keep him alive, while the disarmed Death Eater swam deeper looking for his wand, and attempting wandless and chantless Akio to summon his wand, while unclear as to what direction she should be aiming it. The wandless wonder missed the dark predator arrowing above his head, as the wings of death passed over him as unworthy. Fleur de Lacre closed upon the last Death Eater and grabbed his mask. Assuming that inside the mask was some version of the bubblehead charm, she summoned her Vila fire to fill the inside of the mask. Fire roared through mouth, nose, lungs, searing the eyeballs, and consuming the available oxygen inside the mask at the same time. Its Vila fire magic disrupted the delicate charms of its systems, as the runic array was physically broken by flame damage. Leaving that Death Eater to sink down and finish dying alone, Fleur and Harry confronted the Death Eater who lacked his wand and desperately apparated out to avoid capture or death. Harry wondered if running to Voldemort worked out better than death in battle. He doubted it, but Death Eaters were predators, not warriors. They fought the weak and fled the strong. Their instincts made them weak when confronted. Together they swam towards the merfolk village, and the hostages after Harry cut off the heads of the other 2 Death Eaters. Fleur thought briefly about it, before knotting the hair of one of them to one of the strap of her bathing suit. Someone thought that her Gabrielle was bait, and that Fleur was prey. Perhaps it was time they remembered that Vila used to be a fairy tale creature humans whispered about in the dark, for fear one would come for them. She was done hiding. Cedric found Victor. It had to be Victor, trapped in a block of ice, half transformed into a shark. He was slowly rising to the surface, and clearly too cold to move. Cedric could not shatter the ice, not chantlessly, but he could do the warming charm and a quick renervate to wake and begin to reheat the boy. Given Victor's power, he would be surprised if, warmed and awakened, he could not free himself quickly from the ice. Cedric was about to descend for his hostage when the green light of the killing curse passed him to shatter a quarter of the ice-binding crumb. Cedric bolted, aware no shield could block the killing curse, but not aware of any magic he had which could transfigure water into an effective shield. Panic began to set in as Cedric saw 4 figures rising from the darkness, each bearing the white mask and individual faces of Death Eaters. Cedric would be terrified to face one of the legendary killers on dry land where he could chant. Facing 4 under the water, he knew his only chance was to flee. If he did, the hostages would die. Victor was trapped in the ice. He didn't see Harry or Fleur. Amos Diggory had very strong ideas about what it took to be a man. Cedric was sure that Amos could never forgive him for who he chose to love, but that didn't matter. Amos taught him that a man defended those he loved, and those who depended on him no matter the cost. He was too Hufflepuff to run, and too tired to despair. He charged, disarming and stunning spells flying off his wand as he darted madly, using every bludger-dodging reflex in his seeker-trained body. If this was his last fight, he would meet it face to face. Harry and Fleur opened the fight with 2 powerful stunners cast, the Death Eaters closing on Cedric. Unfortunately, only one hit, and the second one was swatted away with a duelist's wand-generated point shield. That Death Eater turned to begin spraying spells at Fleur, whose Protego protected both Harry and herself, as long as she could hold the power-intensive thing under the battering. Harry grabbed his gillyweed and, taking careful aim, banished it at one particular and small target. In the seconds that took, the free Death Eater cast Renervate on his stunned companion, and 4 highly trained Death Eaters in masks that gave them the equivalent of a bubblehead charm, and thus chanting magic available, turned to face 3 half or less trained children, none of whom could cast chanted magic underwater. No one expected the fight to last long. Harry had a slightly different reason for not expecting the fight to last long, but he could be forgiven this odd difference, because he had banished his gillyweed into a particular mouth. A mouth he could no longer see bound to his post-noodle was a most unhappy snake. Now being a reptile of taste and breeding, he was too well-mannered to point out the many failings, and there was quite a list of his favorite mammals. That being said, he had one serious issue to take up with his speaker. The idiot child kept trying to get killed. How he was allowed to undertake any of these challenges without adult reptile supervision, he could not understand. At least Speaker had the good sense to love Noodle most of all. This was just right and holy, but would never earn him a mouse of his own from Mousegiver. It would not earn him even the right to scratch behind his jaw where he itched after a good molt if Speaker got himself killed before Noodle could save him. Noodle being the creature Speaker loved most meant 2 equally important things. Firstly, his Mousegiver was safe on land. Secondly, the Death Eaters who sought to harm his speaker were trapped alone in the darkness of the lake, where mere humans were little better than prey, with the greatest reptile that ever slithered the earth, with the exception of Harry's mate. But Queen Basilisk, over 1,000 years old, should not be allowed in normal lists anyway. Noodle didn't know if his notice-me-not charms worked, but a black snake in the deep dark of the bottom of Black Lake was less than a shadow, and struck as fast as any fishing spear. Honestly, if the speaker kept getting more powerful, Noodle's venom might start dissolving things into goo like the basilisk. The first Death Eater Noodle struck began thrashing like he had been hit by lightning, but gave no cry, nor made any attempt to activate the mask's portkey for emergency extraction. How convenient. Speaker had got himself disarmed, and his Quidditch captain had got himself stunned, but the Shining Maiden was doing well to keep everyone alive. Noodle closed on the second Death Eater and gave the fool his stated desire, the taste of death. It must have been everything the Death Eater dreamed of, because he never spoke, nor attempted to strike back, merely writhing in what Noodle chose to think of as ecstasy from the very great honor of taking the venom of Speaker's own Noodle. That it hurt worse than a basilisk venom enema. Noodle made a note to use legimancy on one of these Death Eaters to find out which. That last kill got him detected, and a cutting curse slashed through the water at Noodle. Was he not the mighty Noodle? Was he not limber as any actual Noodle, and blessed with a reptilian desire to remain alive and unhurt in a world full of mammals who praised each other for doing dangerous and damaging things like being hurt was somehow not stupid? Noodle dodged and began to think about how he was going to get close enough to bite this last Death Eater if he kept using water jets to scoot away from him. Speaker and the Shining Maiden were busy rescuing hostages, leaving Noodle to deal with serious matters. This was, of course, proper, as killing was reptile business. Monkeys, even or especially monkeys with wands, always made a mess of it. As Noodle was working to close the distance and beginning to get frustrated, the wolf, who is not a wolf, who was also not a shark, but awfully close to one at the moment, shot down and drove his shark teeth into the neck of the last Death Eater. Well, that was fitting. A shark was basically a reptile that had gone slightly wrong a few million years ago, then stopped changing at all when they realized they were only becoming less perfect. He would allow this almost reptile to have one Death Eater of his own. It would not make him a true reptile, but Noodle was a well-raised snake, and was not going to be greedy about prey he wasn't planning on eating anyway. Now, where had his Speaker gotten to? There was a very small girl. She looked like Shining Maiden, but not quite. Noodle decided she was Glitter. This small girl was sobbing, which did not work with gills at all, and trying to speak to her sister, which honestly wasn't working well at all either. Shining Maiden, being brighter than most mammals, was simply hugging the little one. Being smarter than most males was a trait shared by Water Witch and Mouse Giver, making Noodle wonder if mammal brains were actually mounted in their breasts. This would explain why so many witches were smarter than Seeker and Root Singer. This would explain why the little girl, Glitter, was not smart enough to realize she could not talk underwater. The girl had not grown her boob brains, leaving her no brighter than mammal males, which Noodle knew was barely smart enough to operate doorknobs and scratch itchy spots on his skin. Noodle would fix things. It was what his Mouse Giver would expect, and would impress Speaker once again with his reptilian superiority. This kept Speaker from the delusion his insane ways to risk his life could be mistake for plans. Noodle planned, Speaker improvised in strange and disturbing ways until large numbers of people were dead, and something was on fire. Not bad results, but hard on a growing reptile's blood pressure. Noodle felt the wash of Shining Maiden's allure as it surrounded the weaker child, Glitter, and stopped her sobbing. That was good. Noodle wrapped around both woman and girl child and thrust his mind into the small one with delicacy no mere human could muster. Harry called this process info dump, but since that is also what he called Mouse Giver, providing detailed information necessary for survival, Noodle chose to rise above Speaker's ignorance and simply transfer Noodle's understanding of their situation and plans to Gabrielle. Since Noodle could not stop distracting the small girl, he let her cuddle him like Mouse Giver often did, while his Speaker continued cutting off Death Eater heads. It was Goblin custom, and his Speaker was competing as a goblin. Let the Ministry and Lyre of Light get a taste for what that meant. As an afterthought, he turned and provided the same for the Shining Maiden. The two Vila, now aware of Speaker's plan, they formed up together, 4 champions and 4 hostages, and swam for the surface together. Minister's barks. He can't do that. Only Potter and the wench were supposed to survive. This is the Dark Lord's plan. What right does that half-blooded goblin-loving sacrificial offering think he is doing? Barty shouted, crucioing 2 of his guards, and Umbridge once more as he watched all 4 champions and hostages step from Black Lake in a line holding hands. The crowd went wild. Cheering filled the stadium until Harry, Fleur, Victor, and Cedric's hips cleared the water, and the crowd noticed the Death Eater masks, with skulls still in them, hanging from their suits. Cheering turned to screaming, and the veterans of the last war looked up at the magical big screens to notice that the Death Eater masks failed to show on the big screen, but were visible to the naked eye. These were real Death Eaters, ones that had stalked the champions beneath the waters of Black Lake, while the Ministry, its auras, The headmasters of the schools sat in happy ignorance on the shore. Dumbledore's face paled. Karkaroff fell off his chair, screaming in alarm. Madame Maxime rose instantly, her wand in hand. Photographers' flashes went off, and Rita Skeeter charged the water, uncaring about its temperature. There was a hot scoop to be had right now. You could regrow toes, but you could not regrow an exclusive. 58. Chapter 58, Decline and Fall. Albus Dumbledore was in his office, and while in better days he would have called those gathered with him as allies, he was less and less sure he had any, even less sure he deserved any. His decisions had all been logical at the time, and every objection he dismissed from his staff he had confidence in dismissing at the time. Now it seems almost none of those dismissals were warranted, and very few of those decisions were panning out. Mad-Eye Moody, Rufus Scrimgeour, Severus Snape, Minerva McGonagall, and Argus Filch were all gathered in Dumbledore's office. Only Filch and his Kneazle Mrs. Norris looked as nervous as Dumbledore. "Do you have your pensive, Albus?" Moody asked gruffly. It still disturbed people that since the rituals with the Potter boy, Moody had regrown both eye and leg. Albus was reminded that without both eyes Moody could be ignored, as his skill in legimancy rivaling Albus' own required two flesh and blood eyes to use beyond the basic level. A restored Moody meant a legerdemain's in the room able to detect and reveal any of Dumbledore's little nudges. Dumbledore called out softly, "Tweak, fetch my pensive." A Hogwarts elf popped in and placed the Hogwarts pensive on the table. This one pensive was not made by the reclusive African clan that made all modern pensive. This was a work of Rowena Ravenclaw, the greatest mind witch of her age, and the designer of the original pensive. It had features lesser copies did not, one of which was very convenient. The wizards and witch put their wands to their heads and withdrew their memories, both of Bartimus Crouch Sr. and the supposedly long-dead Barty Crouch Jr. Dumbledore made a gesture, and the silver glow of the pensive swelled up to absorb them all. The figures walked together through a nasty piece of ancient history. The trial of Igor Karkaroff, Death Eater, and now Durmstrang headmaster. Igor was in the prisoner box, trapped under truth wards that would not stop him from lying, but would flash for all to see if he did. Karkaroff was doing his best to sell out enough Death Eaters to avoid Azkaban, and Bartimus Crouch Sr. was enjoying every second of the attempt while showing no sign of letting it succeed. They watched as Karkaroff gave up Rockwood, Dolohov, and Lucius Malfoy, only to find that they had mysteriously been cleared through claiming the Imperious Curse had compelled them. The fake transcript of the trial of Sirius Black laid the blame on that man. Since there never was a trial, the right amount of gold made the fake record include Black's confession to everything. Moody, the current Moody, snorted. "Very convenient that. I thought it smelled then, but we were so busy chasing Death Eaters after Voldemort's fall, who had time even to blink, let alone think, until it was all over." Scrimgeour agreed. "I do admire their restraint for not claiming Sirius Imperiused all the other Death Eaters already in Azkaban, and just restricting it for the ones still awaiting trail when the Potters died and Sirius got taken." Moody grunted. "Bit hard when they can't get word to the prisoners that they need to change their story once they are in Azkaban. Even if some of the Dementors defected to fight with Voldemort, none of them are any damned good at communicating." They watched the trial go on until Karkaroff, about to be dragged off, cast his final rope, desperate to find his rock of salvation. "I do know one other name." One of the Dark Lord's inner circle, one of his Black Hand, his very personal elite tasked with operations other Death Eaters were not even permitted to know about. Karkaroff shouted, looking at Bartimus Crouch Sr. Crouch smiled down cruelly. "Very well, name the names of this Black Hand of your Dark Lord." Karkaroff smiled. "Bellatrix, Rabastan, and Rodolphus Lestrange." Karkaroff began. Crouch slammed the desk. "Who are already caught for the torture of the Roars Longbottom just days after the attack on the Potters. Names, Karkaroff, if you want your freedom, give me names of Death Eaters we don't already have." Karkaroff laughed. "You want names? I will take your Veritas serum, I will drink it by the bottle, and still this is the name I will give you. The Dark Lord's most fanatical follower, the last of the Black Hand, is Bartimus Crouch." Bartimus Crouch Sr. shifted forward, his face darkening. You lie. Karkarov's eyes looked ecstatic as he spoke the last bit of his secret, the bit that would cost Bartimus Crouch any chance of becoming post-war Minister for Magic. Junior. Barty Crouch Jr. was the Dark Lord's most dedicated, most fanatical follower. Karkarov finished, and the runes flashed only truth as he laughed as the auras beat him silent. In the watching seats, auras closed on Barty Crouch Jr., who drew his wand. His father faced him down. Deny it. Tell that Death Eater it is a lie, Bartimus Crouch Sr. demanded. In return, Barty Crouch Jr. cast Mortsamord and set off the Dark Mark inside the Ministry of Magic. He was screaming his loyalty to the Dark Lord and threatening the destruction of those who betrayed Voldemort until he was stunned unconscious. After every threat, he would lick his lips in a tic that had made him seem disturbed even in school. Moody muttered, I told you that lip-licking thing looked just like Barty Jr. Scrimgeour, however, was walking around Bartimus Sr. and Jr., looking at their postures, their gestures, their facial expressions. He sat back and steepled his hands, went over their word choices, where they put the inflections on their words. His eyes shot open. The man who officiated the second task was Barty Crouch Jr. Moody looked at him and nodded slowly. Moody was twice the fighter Scrimgeour would ever be, but Rufus Scrimgeour was a deductive genius, and the expert the Aura's office turned to for personality profiles and behavior analysis. What Slytherins did as a social art form, Scrimgeour had fully weaponized. Magic could change your body, change your voice, even change your species, but it could not change your fundamental personality. Like a light inside a lampshade, who you were shown through whatever outer form you wrapped around yourself, so Scrimgeour had learned to ignore the lampshade and only look at the light. Albus objected. Barty Crouch died in Azkaban, Severus Snape drawled lazily. As attested to by the Dementors, and reported by no less a reliable agent of the DMLE as the fifth severed head retrieved by our blood-thirsty little goblin. Dumbledore winced, aware that his awareness of the Death Eater heads brought to the surface in their masks extended only far enough to send Harry Potter and Cedric Diggory back to their rooms and forbid them to come out. He had been so busy lecturing the boys on how killing was always the wrong response and how expected better of them that he had ignored Moody and Scrimgeour, taking McGonagall to identify who was under the masks. Killing is always wrong. I worry that young Harry is losing his way. Dumbledore offered sadly. McGonagall had enough. Albus, do you not think that a secret Death Eater impersonating our Minister of Magic, being inside Hogwarts itself, and trying to kill our champions inside their tasks right in front of us might be a more serious issue than how our students defend themselves? Dumbledore shook his head. It would be impossible for an illusion or transfiguration to hold up under the Hogwarts wards. He would have been revealed. Professor Snape sneered. A simple polyjuice potion would get past the wards, as magic would accept the outer body is indeed a match for the minister. A deeper identity test would be of little use, as a son is so closely related to the father that most identification charms would be inconclusive. Dumbledore snapped finally. What do you expect me to do? Launch a legimancy attack on the Minister of Magic. Just launching it will trigger his guards, and if it is Barty Crouch Jr., it won't even work. Voldemort's inner circle were trained to the limit of occlumency, as you should know Severus. If Snape was bothered by Dumbledore's reference to his former position as both Death Eater and one of two occlumency instructors, along with Augustus Rockwood of Voldemort's inner circle, he did not show it. It was Moody who answered. I expect you to do nothing, Albus. You are so good at that. No, send Minnie. That is why I brought Filch in. Professor McGonagall suddenly stiffened. You want to use me as a Death Eater sniffing cat? Scrimgeour slapped his knee, following Moody's logic. That would work. A cat could smell the polyjuice on him, and cats' senses are more attuned to the unreal. You taught Barty Crouch and worked with Bartimus Crouch. Your cat will know which one is in there. Dumbledore frowned. You think Barty Crouch is going to let Professor McGonagall just walk up to him and offer her a cat treat? He would kill her if she tried to get close. Barty Crouch was one of the most violent of Tom's chosen ones. Ignored as always, Argus Filch straightened up and thrust his chin forward. Now he knew why he was here. Not just a headmaster, me. The ancient squib caretaker said bitterly. Dumbledore smiled reassuringly at the caretaker. Now, Argus, no one is asking you to risk yourself against a trained Death Eater. Even wizards would be in danger. Dumbledore continued before his caretaker interrupted him for the first time ever. And I'm not a wizard, am I? Filch snarled. Not a day goes by that at least 10 of those little brats don't remind me. Not one of them would think of me any longer than it took to laugh or spit, like I'm something that they scrape off their little shoes. Every muggle-born and half-blood in the school knows they are at least better than me, and the purebloods, they just can't understand why I haven't done myself and the world a favor and killed myself already. Filch said, turning to Professor McGonagall. I have to see the minister about his requirements for the Yule Ball. I always carry Mrs. Norris with me. She's the only one in this whole school that even sees me, let alone cares. The minister won't look at me. I'm too far beneath him to look at, and young Barty was worse. If you were in my arms, you could be a bloody dragon, let alone just the wrong cat, and nobody would notice. Everyone in the room looked down, save Professor McGonagall, who reached out and gripped Argus Flick's hand. Thank you, Argus. If you would let me know when it is time. You can leave Mrs. Norris in my office. My wards will keep anyone from seeing her accidentally while you are walking around holding me. McGonagall offered softly, treating Filch as an equal for perhaps the first time. Crouch Manor Lord Voldemort looked at the mirrors set up so that he could enjoy watching the task unfold. Mirrors that did indeed show his Death Eaters, since while Voldemort shared a bit about how the Death Eater mask enchantments worked, he was the master of those magics, and they would always yield to him. Voldemort watched as Barty Crouch not only failed to kill 4 school children before the entire world, but cost him 7 Death Eaters. Lord Parkinson had managed to apparate out before he was caught, but 2 of the Death Eaters that had been killed and identified had been DMLE. One was an Aura, and one an Azkaban guard. Voldemort's secret hand inside the Ministry was losing fingers. Between that ill-timed and ill-thought nonsense at the World Cup and Barty's amateur hour here, Voldemort was losing key subordinates, and more, he was losing his reach into places he needed for his coup. Voldemort aimed his wand, and Lord Parkinson flinched, expecting a Cruciatus curse to punish him for failure. Instead, the Dark Lord simply dried him off. Return to your duties at the Wizengamot. It is imperative you stall any recall of or investigation into Minister Crouch. Take no open action. At the 3rd task, I will use Harry Potter's death to announce my return. Then you can act. Lord Parkinson collapsed and kissed the homunculus child like clothes, and Voldemort resisted the urge to kill him until the fool apparated out. As soon as he was gone, Voldemort spent his rage and his magic on destroying the valuables of Crouch Manor he could see and reach. Lucius No Name offered gently, Barty Crouch is your most loyal follower, my lord. Voldemort turned his wand on Malfoy, and his voice sounded tired and defeated. Barty Crouch is my torturer. Bellatrix is my champion, Rabastan and Rudolphus her thugs, but Barty existed to do the things that needed to be done that were not worth dirtying Bella's hand. Some magics twist the weak-minded and leave them broken tools. Barty is a broken tool. He was the expendable one, and yet he is the only one I have left. Voldemort hissed. Nagini, his snake, came and soothed the Dark Lord by rising and letting him stroke the serpent. You were to be my hand in the Wizengamot, but due to the games of Potter's little circle of brats, I have to rely on Parkinson. Bella was to be my warlord, but somehow those brats killed her and broke Sirius Black out of Azkaban. Voldemort snarled. McNair was my hand in magical creatures. He was to reach the werewolves for me, Fenrir Greyback and his ilk, but the brat killed him. Dulohav was to lead my strike teams, the one I would send to cull the loyal auras before the war left the shadows. He was to thin their herd, as the ones I corrupted led the honest ones into Dulohav's kill teams, until the Ministry was down its best before they even knew the war was on. Black killed him. Sirius Black, who should be rotting in Azkaban, except somehow the brats broke him out. Turning to Malfoy, Voldemort whispered, Rockwood was my hand in the unspeakables. He was going to get us access to the prophesy, to find out the half that Snape didn't hear, but Dumbledore did. Rockwood would have been able to warn me if they learned about my Horcrux, as only the unspeakables would know how to deal with them. He was going to deliver us whatever faint hope Dumbledore has been clinging to over the Potter brat, but thanks to those idiot children, Sirius Black, and even your beloved ex-wife. I don't even have my hand in the unspeakables anymore." Lucius realized that he was the reason that the Horcrux got discovered, and went pale. Trying not to show his fear, Lucius asked the question he dreaded the answer to. "What will you do now, then?" Voldemort laughed, and it was a terrifying sound. It reminded Lucius why even as a half-alive child this broken remnant of a Dark Lord could terrify the wizarding world. "What will I do now that I do not have time to bleed the ministry from within, now that I don't have the time to gather armies of dark creatures to do the dying for us while we do the killing of a weakened and divided DMLE?" Voldemort asked, and laughed again. "Why, Lucius, I am going to tear my life and power from the blood of the boy who lived on live international broadcast, and then I am going to summon all my Death Eaters to my side and take the ministry by force." Lucius winced. It was an almost Gryffindor plan. No subtlety, no deception, no deep and intricate plot. Nagini struck, and two fangs punctured Lucius' forearm where his dark mark was. He waited to die, but the snake simply withdrew his fangs and laughed the disturbing hissing laugh of the serpent. Lucius froze as the lesson became clear. Lucius was used to thinking like a Slytherin, playing games of false appearance and questionable loyalties. Such were part and parcel of the Slytherin teachings, yet there was this also to remember about the ways of the House of Serpents. When the time came to strike, it was the speed and surprise of the attack that killed before the target knew it was in danger. The great hall breakfast. Cedric Diggory ate mechanically. He knew and feared what the day would bring, and when the ghost of a sound signaled the soft wings of postal owls arriving, his shoulders crept up around his ears. He would not flinch. He would not react. He would be strong in the face of what came. The Diggory family owl darted for the Hufflepuff table, and a red howler was in its claws. As it released the howler towards Cedric, ready to shame his son for the terrible crime of loving someone inconvenient for Amos Diggory's great plan for Cedric's life. As the howler was released, falling like a social death sentence toward Hufflepuff's golden boy, a clear alto voice cut through the buzz of breakfast from the head table. "Accio bigotry," snapped Professor Sprout, standing in full fury. She should have been a ridiculous image, a short, stout, casually dressed witch of late middle years, but magic swirled around her like a storm, causing her to shine with golden light. As the red howler approached, and a mouth formed to begin hurling its curses, Professor Sprout snapped a second spell. Reducto. She cast the disintegration curse at the howler, and it was blasted the length of the great hall in a shower of flame and ash, leaving the entire room to stare at her, wand pointed and still blazing to match the Hufflepuff house matron's eyes. "I trust I will not have to address this again," the witch said with a coldness even the Slytherins could accept, and the most Gryffindor of Gryffindors would not test. She turned to face Cedric, who met his head of house gaze with a smile. She returned the smile and transformed again into the motherly figure Hufflepuff knew and loved. Still, her own badgers got the message. She may love all of them, but when the mother of badgers said she did not tolerate bigotry in her house, it was not optional to obey. Ravenclaw House, as always, kept its own secrets, but if no one was outwardly harassing Roger Davis, no one was exactly talking to him either. At least his own owl, when it arrived, carried only a normal letter that Davis tucked into his robes without reading, and went back to breakfast. Pansy Parkinson left the Slytherin table and walked to Hufflepuff to stand before Harry Potter and just glare at him until he finally broke and addressed her. "Is there something I can help you with, Miss Parkinson?" Harry asked, wondering what he had done to offend her. "Did you ever think about doing something other than killing them, Potter?" Pansy asked, her voice rising. "I know some of them. I know some of their children. How do you think they feel when they get their parents' bodies back in two different boxes because some little goblin freak cut off their heads?" Pansy shrieked at Harry. Harry glared back, unprepared for the hostility, but he was saved from answering by a voice that rang like a bell, so pure and sweet, filled with power that beat at the hall like thunder as the allure of Avila compelled every eye upon her and every ear upon her words. "The first I knew of these Death Eaters was when they tried to drown me by cancelling my bubblehead charm. Then it was sending Imperiused Grindylow, killing curses, cutting curses, blasting curses. I lost count of the number of ways they tried to kill me, I did stun one, who shot at Diggory with a killing curse. The next second, his fellow Death Eater re-enervated him, and the two of them were back to trying to murder Harry, Cedric, Victor, and myself. That was the last time I struck to stun. Victor Crumb pushed his way to face the angry Parkinson. You are wrong, Parkinson. When they left me frozen in ice, laughing because they told me their intention was to leave me to watch my mother drown while I could do nothing about it, I had time to think about appropriate response. Diggory thawed me and gave me a chance to get free, and let me tell you, not all of your little friends made it home in either box. I tore one of them limb from limb, and what I tore off I ate. So no, Miss Parkinson, not all your little friend's father made it back in either box. Victor said colder than the ice used to imprison him. Parkinson glared at Harry and shouted one last time. You are all monsters. Harry turned to Fleur and Crumb. I'm okay with that, but let's me monsters that live all the way through and go home again. Crumb nodded grimly, Fleur nodded regally, Cedric nodded reluctantly, and Noodle looked up at Hermione in wonder. Dollar Speaker said something wise. You put hallucinogens in that last mouse, didn't you? Noodle asked in shock, sure his ears were deceiving him. Hermione and Neville just laughed softly as Noodle looked upon his speaker with wonder. Parkinson stalked back to the Slytherin table where Millicent Bulstrode and Draco Malfoy were laughing at Pansy Parkinson, while casting cold gazes of naked threat at the rest of the Slytherin table. The message was clear. Those who had Death Eater family who tried to kill Harry Potter and his friends would not get that family back. If the Hufflepuffs were willing to stack bodies in the open over this, their Slytherin allies were more than willing to make problem children who made threats simply disappear. Dumbledore looked upon the children of his school, the ones that he had done so many terrible things to protect from the war that had once torn apart their world, and threatened to do again, and despaired. Had it all been for nothing? Had all his sacrifices not kept the war from reaching inside his school? Dumbledore sighed softly. At least last time the war didn't reach into this school. Rufus Scrimgeour laughed at the headmaster, a surprised bark of laughter from the usually reserved Slytherin Dada instructor. Don't be silly, headmaster, Scrimgeour said simply. I was in Hogwarts when the last war started. The war began here and waged for years. Voldemort recruited under your nose, trained his Death Eaters in your halls, and chose and marked the victims in the hallways and classrooms. This is just the first time anyone in this school has fought back. Dumbledore turned to object to Scrimgeour's claim when he saw Severus Snape nodding along, in complete agreement with his fellow Slytherin. The headmaster looked across the faces of his Slytherin professors to see the dancing blue flames over the goblet of fire dance happily, the wall behind it covered in ivy that his spells could not keep away. Dumbledore had lost control of his own castle, and through his mistakes, lost the ability to even wield magic if away from it. How should he object to the war coming to Hogwarts, when thanks to his mistake with the goblet, Dumbledore could only fight the war when, and if it came to Hogwarts itself? He set down his fork. Suddenly the bacon tasted like ash, and the eggs like regret. Dumbledore's reflection was shattered when the second wave of post-owls strafed the breakfast tables with a special double edition Daily Prophet. Dumbledore didn't bother to wave his wand to defend his food, but it didn't matter. Phileas Flitwick was a charms master and goblin who took breakfast very seriously. His modified plate and goblet protego protected every food or drink-bearing surface of the hall before the papers began to rain down. While this did cause a greater than average number of students hit in the head by daily prophets, most of them dearly wanted to see the headlines of the event. Death Eaters strike at Triwizard Tournament claim by boy who lives. Page 512. Boy who murders needs to have his wand snapped claims Minister of Magic Crouch. Page 24. Pardoned Death Eaters beheaded in Black Lake. Families deny connection to Dark Lord. Page 1315. Two houses in Hogsmeade turn to gingerbread. Fairies are blamed. Page 1617. Fleur de Lacre photo retrospective. Pages 1826. Diggory or Potter, who wore it best, who wore it least. Pages 26-27. Victor Crumb wet and wicked. All the photos for the discerning witch. Pages 28-32. Minister's speech called crude and unbefitting a minister. Petition for vote of no confidence called for by witches for decency, the Patroness Parent League, and the Hogsmeade Chamber of Commerce. Page 33. Dumbledore sighed. He had passed along what they suspected in Minerva's report to Amelia Bones, but legally there was no mechanism for moving against the minister without a Wizengamot vote. The Wizengamot was not to formally meet again until after the third task. The prophet just showed the fault lines in wizarding Britain were wider than ever, and Voldemort was free to move in the shadows. 59. Chapter 59, Tea Parties, Tiaras and Towers. Author's note: I full-on stole something from J.R.R. Tolkien in this chapter. I am doing so simply because his lines were so beautiful I simply could not bear to use some lesser thing in their place when these lines inspired the entire scene. I claim no credit for them. If you don't like the scene, that is on me, but the lines are freaking epic and need to be used for epic scenes. Fred, George, Millicent, Hermione, and Harry pored over the Marauder's map and Hermione's notes. Item 1. We know Ravenclaw's diadem is a Horcrux. Hermione said, only reason we are torturing ourselves like this, groaned Harry. Item 2. You can feel a Horcrux if you are ever near to it. Hermione continued, unsympathetically, which is why I'm not training for my third task. I am spelunking in this bloody great castle, complained Harry. Item 3. We have searched the whole castle and not found it. Hermione said, frowning slightly, which means we are doomed. Voldemort wins, the world burns. Can I nap now? Harry begged. Cheer up. Our map of Hogwarts, said Fred, was complete when we stole it, added George. And we have added 3 rooms, mused Fred. 4 secret passages, agreed George. Lost a corridor, complained Fred. Lost 2 bathrooms, one of them we were hiding stuff in, cursed George. A bedroom with a sleeping sphinx, remembered Fred. And on alternate Thursdays 1 door opens to Iceland, cheered George. In a bakery, sighed Fred. With Randallin, said George. Mad Muggle cake high as Draco's nose, enthused Fred. More layers than Millicent's plots, sighed George. Cream filling thicker than Brother Ron, agreed Fred. Harry blinked at the twins speak, then over at a frowning Hermione. He sighed and goblined up. So back to work, back to searching. Voldemort is clearly coming for me in the last task to complete whatever back from the dead bullshit he got from Horcruxer history, when he had head boy access to the restricted section. We need to find Ravenclaw's diadem, so the only Horcrux left is the snake, and that one is ruddy hard to miss, Harry said. Hermione looked stunned. Her mouth dropped open, her eyes lit like a prophet that had just received the word of the God of the printed word. Harry, this is important. Is there such a book as Horcrux, a history? Hermione said, pinning Harry to his chair. Millicent looked at her twin lions and said, right, this is where sane snakes and housebroken lions run away like sane creatures. Harry was protesting. It was a joke, Hermione, because you are always on about Hogwarts, a history. Hermione was on him harder than an owl on unprotected bacon as Millicent and the Weasley twins slipped from the room and left him to his fate. The Horcrux search would continue. It wasn't a good plan, but it was all they had. Horcrux didn't just drop into your lap because you needed them. Reality just didn't work that way. Classroom next to Ravenclaw Tower. Draco Malfoy had never been this close to murder. Well, he probably had, but that was during an actual fight. This was the closest he had ever been to premeditated murder, and he found that what it required to get him to this point made the thought of just killing some muggle randomly, because you needed it to make your evil slave brand stick, was even harder to justify. Have to have a word with dear old Dad about that decision. Draco tried to keep the murder from his voice as he coaxed a crying Luna. Here, Luna, you need to drink this blood replenishment potion. It's really good. I was working with Neville on it, and he said some nonsense about explaining to the plants this was to help people heal, and they didn't object to having their leaves harvested. Supposed to make the potion work better. You don't argue with Longbottom about huggy stuff or plants, so this has to be good. Luna smiled as she took the potion in shaking hands. Her body was thin. She had lost enough blood to be life-threatening in a muggle, still not good in a witch. Someone had used her blood to make a blood ward on the Ravenclaw Tower door. A blood ward that ripped the blood from her body when she attempted to go to her dorm to sleep. Luna took the potion and drank it, as the gathered fairies and shape-shifting puka around the table laughed. The Silver Lady, Ravenclaw's ghost, and the red-haired regal fairy maiden beside her frowned. Luna's color came back, and she hugged the blushing Draco. The wild queen of the fairy who sat at Luna's table sipping tea began to show spots of red upon her cheeks and fire in her eyes as her hands fell to the bronze sword at her belt and the tall staff that stood as if rooted in mid-air behind her. They drew your blood to use against you. They worked blood magic against you, my host. As you guessed, it will be my pleasure to strike them down. I am Mab, queen of air and darkness. Let me slaughter them for this crime. The Tuatha Dedanan was no slim and pale maiden fit to grace a tower awaiting rescue. Her arms were corded with muscle that left Draco feeling a touch unmanned, and she moved with the kind of deadliness that reminded him too much of Millicent Bulstrode when she forgot herself. Luna shook her head. They didn't draw it. It was that time of the month, and they must have taken my tampon before house elves banished it. They didn't steal my blood, because technically I threw it away. Draco blanched, as he knew in the old religion, a woman's menstrual blood had a great deal more power magically than blood from her body. It was tied to the magic of her bloodline, magic over her entire line, the living, the dead, the unborn. To use such blood magic against the person whose blood you stole would not get you a ticket to Azkaban. It got you tossed through the veil in the unspeakable's wing of the ministry. Queen Mab rose, sword in hand, and her hair rising around her as if swept by an unseen wind. Her eyes were without pupil, just blue gemstones in white orbs, and they blazed now as the light around her seemed to fade, leaving her a single flame in growing darkness. They have dared to use the blood magic against you, my host. I will give them such a death their families will curse the fact they even let them be born. Queen Mab said, and I will beat the air so strongly that Draco felt himself hit the floor head-bowed, even as his occlumency shields locked down hard to keep the madness in her voice from driving him to follow her in depopulating Ravenclaw Tower. Luna alone seemed unaffected. She reached over and stroked the bronze sword in Mab's hand, and blood flowed from Luna's hand. Smiling, she wove it in the air, like she so often wove flower crowns from the flowers she took from Neville's ever-growing greenhouses. Only this crown was made not of flowers, but thorns. As Luna wove, she sang to the thorns, weaving the rune poem of Thurisaz, the thorn rune into something between a charm and a rune stave. She wove her blood into a crown of thorns made from interlocking runes made of her own charmed blood, and wove into it all Luna's hopes for Mab's protection. Luna sang of her desire that her friends never be harmed, never be bound, never be afraid, and her magic and intent wove into the crown. The power of Fairy was wild in the night. This close to Yule the powers of the Fairy ran wild and dark, and both loved the magic of blood far too well not to answer Luna's call. Mab found her own magic answering, and almost without thinking, she joined her voice to Luna's, her magic to Luna's. Draco let his shields fall as he realized Luna did not have power enough to finish the work she had started, as far beyond her alone as lifting Hagrid with her arms would be. Draco joined his voice and his magic to the working, and as he sank his magic into Luna's blood, he felt his own blood answering. He had the chance to resist, but he could not both resist and still have the power to finish the working before Luna gave her life to the spell rather than let it fail. Luna's mother had been one of the handful of witches given the right to experiment with charms, and she had died in such an act of spell creation, for magic was never without cost. The greatest magics always demanded sacrifice, and Luna, like her mother, would deny magic nothing. Draco let himself be bound to her blood as he tried with the pouring of the last of his magic to at least bind Luna to life. There was a rush of magic from Hogwarts itself. The cauldron of Dagda itself rang like a deep bell whose voice sang in the stones of the castle, and the magic of Hogwarts answered. The wash of the magics of stone and rock, water and wave, fire and hearth, storm and sky washed at the blood crown and rooted it deeper in both magic and reality than the working of witch and fairy alone could weave, and it was done. Luna stood, and being of much lesser stature than Queen Mab, the queen was forced to sheath her sword and sit to be crowned. Luna placed the blood crown upon the head of Queen Mab, and its magic sang to hers, and hers to it, as the Queen of Air and Darkness was crowned in blood by the least beloved daughter of Ravenclaw in the heart of winter's darkness. Queen Mab laughed, and the fairies of this most dangerous of all tea parties laughed with her. The queen bowed her head to Luna. "Very well, little Ravenclaw." I will not slaughter them for their crime. Still, you have given me a very great gift and crowned me with a great and terrible power. I cannot allow myself to be bound by such a debt. A gift for a gift is the way." Queen Mab said. Her smile was terrible to behold, but Luna smiled back happily. Queen Mab turned to the black cat, far closer to the size of a panther than a normal cat, and whispered to it, "Cat Sith, mighty hunter, find in this place a crown fit for a Ravenclaw, a crown fit to match the blood crown I am gifted, a crown fit to answer for the blood that was taken this night." The cat that had been growling since the hunt for blood and vengeance had been called off perked up at that, and as he bolted through the castle, Draco could feel the dark and savage joy that filled it. Whatever gift Cat Sith sought would be more terrible in its way than the slaughter he had been denied. Draco! He came back to himself when he heard his name. Draco turned and looked to see Luna holding out a muffin cleverly made to resemble a human heart. Only Luna would find a way to bake muffins that looked like a human heart, freshly ripped from the chest, because it made her tea party guests happy. It was a sign of how much these tea parties were taking out of him that Draco bowed his assent, and took a muffin that, to all outer respects, looked like a human heart. Yes, Draco shuddered. It had been charmed to beat. He bit into the human heart, and while his gorge tried to rise as hot red liquid thick as blood entered his mouth, he found himself moaning in pleasure. Strawberry tart, hot as blood, thick and sweet, with the flesh of the heart being red velvet cake. How Slytherin would crown Luna their queen or run in terror before her if they knew she baked enchanted muffins like beating human hearts that surpassed the best strawberry tart derby or the Hogwarts elves had ever made. Draco would sell his soul for tarts like these, if he wasn't sure a Malfoy's soul barely rated a cookie. Good thing he was stinking rich and good-looking. There would indeed be other muffins. Draco was so lost in his third muffin, ignoring the two very different smiles from Luna and Mab at the look of his red-stained lips and chin as he feasted on beating human heart muffins, he missed the return of Cat Sith and its prize. In the come-and-go room, the room of lost things, Ravenclaw's diadem had been hidden by Lord Voldemort all those years ago when he returned to ask for the position of defense against the dark arts from Dumbledore. The room of lost things was where things went when they were lost at Hogwarts, but things that were lost in Hogwarts could not be found. No magic that summoned or searched could find them. The room of lost things did not accept the magic of finding things. No, this room was about loss and loss alone. Cat Sith was the mightiest hunter of fairy, and as any creature of fairy, he knew the old bargains. He knew the darkest workings of magic and nightmare, of madness and pain. Cat Sith was cat beyond all other cats. He delighted in the fear and suffering of his prey far more than the simple kill, and he delighted in the kill. Cat Sith called to the Ravenclaw diadem with magic it could not deny, for he called it not to be found, but tempted it with what could yet be lost. Innocence, sanity, control, hope, immortality, and lives. Oh my yes. The potential for death and deaths of such exquisite horror that Cat Sith almost drooled were in his call, and the Horcrux corrupted diadem of Ravenclaw, mightiest mind witch of her or any other age, heard and answered. Running back to his queen's side, he dropped it in her hand. The corruption and darkness of the greatest dark wizard, since Grindelwald was nothing to the inhuman soul of Cat Sith, and less to the queen of air and darkness, yet to any human it would be mind and soul destroying. Voldemort's most bitter failure, the diadem of Ravenclaw focused the mind of the wearer tenfold, giving its intent and will a power beyond all human limits. The manipulation of mental magics, the manipulation of the unreal in the act of transformation, the weaving of the unreal to bend and bind reality itself in spatial magics were all magnified, but with his soul severed, and a fragment of his soul forever trapped screaming, its rage and hatred magnified by the diadem tenfold. To place the diadem upon his own head would be to lose himself to madness that left him incapable of anything save burning himself out as he slaughtered and raged beyond control until the magics he channeled either burned him out or left no world for him to stand on, a weapon he could not wield and dared not destroy. Voldemort lost it in the place where nothing could be found, and only the prospect of a far greater loss drew it out again. Draco was too slow, too terribly slow. For all his seeker's reflexes, he was just a mortal boy, and some things are simply too terrible to face and not be shocked, if only for a moment. Queen Mab placed the diadem of Ravenclaw upon Luna Lovegood's brow, the seer of the unreal, the girl who lives forever in the shadow between reality and chaos, in the heart of the darkest part of the year, was crowned by the Queen of Air and Darkness with the diadem of Ravenclaw, corrupted and empowered by the soul of Lord Voldemort. With fairy magic unleashed and empowered, grown mad and potent beyond reason with the magic of Hogwarts, soaked so very deep in the stone that the castle forced itself to exist in both reality and unreality. A mind that wove chaos as easily as her fingers wove flower stems was gifted the power to twist space and time, matter and energy, and had every humiliation and pain of her life laid bare before the tenfold rage of Lord Voldemort. Long lost to the pain of his self-inflicted soul torment, Luna blazed in a ghostly light that lit her flesh from within. Her voice sang in unholy harmonies that wove through realities that were, could be, must never be, and blasted from existence at her voice. And now at last it comes. You will give me the diadem freely. In place of the Dark Lord you will set up a queen, and I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night. Fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me in despair. She lifted up her hands, and from the diadem that she wore there issued a great light that illuminated her alone and left all else dark. She stood before Draco, seeming now tall beyond measurement and beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. Luna said, and reality trembled at her voice. The Silver Lady cried out in horror. Mother, no. Turning to the Silver Lady, the ghost of Rowena Ravenclaw's only daughter, Luna smiled. It is time I reclaimed my tower and took back what was mine. Draco fell to the floor, blood streaming from his nose, tears from his eyes as power flowed back into him, the magical exhaustion of before banished, and his magical core screaming as power 10 times what he could hold tore through his body and his mind. He was dying. On some level he processed this, but that was not important. Not yet. Not now. Luna, no, he called out, reaching towards her. She caressed his hand as she passed, but would not look upon him. A single tear fell down from her face, and burned like a star as it fell to the floor to solidify into a diamond that burned with its own light. Walking past Draco, she strode to the doors of Ravenclaw Tower, where her less-than-loving dorm mates had woven a ward in her own blood to rip all of her blood from her should she attempt to pass. With the diadem of Ravenclaw upon her head, and the power of the unreal beating at the walls of reality, demanding to be let in, Luna stepped forward. Blood exploded from her body, soaking her robes until she was clad in a gown of flowing scarlet blood. She took her wand from behind her ear and flicked at the door, and the stone warded by one of the founding four was ripped out and scattered before her. Lisa Turpin and Cho Chang stared at Luna. Cho finally shouted out, "That is impossible. You cannot be here. You aren't strong enough to break a blood ward." Luna stopped and smiled. It was not a cruel smile in and of itself, just wild and strange. Her voice was airy, almost bemused as Luna answered softly, "I was always strong enough. I was always strong enough to do everything but make you care, but now I don't anymore, so that is all right. You always had it backwards. No, that's not right. You had it upside down. I was never less than you, for you to trample on. I was always greater than you, so very worried that you would break if I wasn't careful. Now I see, though. I can't fix any of you if you are upside down. If I cannot fix you in this upside-down world, I will have to fix it." Luna began to chant words that Lisa and Cho could not understand. They cast disarmament, then stunning, then blasting, then magic-canceling charms to the limit of their power again and again, but Luna ignored them. Luna sang to the universe because she knew it was wrong. Up was down, down was up, right was wrong, and the world simply didn't have enough screaming. Laughing softly, she began to set Ravenclaw Tower right. Dumbledore cried out. McGonagall as his deputy fell as well, lesser in connection and power both, as the whole of Ravenclaw Tower was ripped from the castle and inverted to hang upside down above the highest spire, the magics of the wards twisting and churning space, time, magic, and reality in ways that Dumbledore had to tear his eyes and mind away from lest he be lost in them. Phileas Flitwick was bound to Ravenclaw Tower in ways those not of the house would not understand. The master of the Tower of Eagles was bound to his tower, and his charges by the intent woven into the very stones of the tower by Rowena Ravenclaw herself. Those bound to the stones, as master of her house, could not be free of their duty while they lived. Her daughter failed in that duty and was bound to the tower even dead. Phileas Flitwick had done his best to always be true to his charges, loving the difficult and moody House of Eagles, even though its endless creativity and bright minds were often so consumed by competition that they turned on themselves in ways others expected only of Slytherin. He loved his house, but he knew it. Half-goblin in the tower himself growing up, too bright to ignore, too obviously inhuman to accept, he knew full well the feeling of the eagle's claws on those the house could neither ignore nor accept. He had failed to find a way other than fear to end his own bullying, but he never stopped trying. He saw through the charms he had woven into the common room the coming of Luna Lovegood, clad in a gown of her own blood, tears of pain and rejection on her face, along with a soft, dreamy smile that said she had found a way to set everything right. He saw Luna stretch out her hand and turn Cho Chang and Lisa Turpin into the monsters they had chosen to be with Luna. She reshaped their flesh and their minds with a wave of her wand, but left them the awareness of the humanity they had lost so they could gibber and howl in fear as they fled before her. First of the Ravenclaws, to encounter the seer of the unreal as she ascended to her throne. The inverted tower had been taken. The seer of the unreal had claimed her throne, and all of Ravenclaw would look upon her in love and terror as she showed the Tower of the Wise all that was hidden in the universe. She filled their minds with the knowledge that humanity was not ever meant to know, and the Tower of Eagles and Ravens sang with screams and laughter as the would-be wise drank from the knowledge of the seer and were unmade by it. A lone boy stood, wiping his nose from the blood that continued to pour, and idly wondered why that didn't seem to bother him. Broom. I need my broom. Can't really do anything stupid and heroic without a broom, Draco muttered. As the assembled witches and wizards worked great and powerful arts to attempt to undo the magics that stole a tower, to reach the innocent students of Ravenclaw Tower, one boy sought out a broom with a sneer on his face and a chant on his lips. Idiot, idiot, idiot. Mother is going to murder me if I live. She's going to murder me twice if I die. Stupid Gryffindorish nonsense. Draco was muttering as he shoved past Professor Dumbledore and Flitwick to jump out the shattered stone where the base of Ravenclaw Tower ought to be. The blood from his nose was now falling upward, which he supposed shouldn't surprise him. He jumped onto his broom and managed to dodge both Dumbledore and Flitwick's attempts to bind and summon him back, which did surprise him for a bit. Mr. Malfoy, I cannot allow you to risk your life just to save those innocent students, Dumbledore said in his most commanding grandfatherly tone. Malfoy's grandfather, Abraxas Malfoy, had bought his way out of a death sentence for crimes committed under Grindwald, so it didn't have quite the same effect on Draco. I'm not a hero to save innocents. I'm a bloody dragon. I'm off to save the wicked witch. Draco thought if he was to have a line to put on his tombstone, it should be one of his own, not Dumbledore's light-headed idiocy. He didn't mind dying so much as being remembered as a hero, following his blood as it twisted and flowed through skies that flowed through wonders and horrors of worlds that might be, should be, once were, or he seriously freaking hope never came to pass. He followed a rainbow covered with dancing bunnies through a lake of blood where babies tore each other apart in endless cannibalistic fury, across a dance floor where two figures spun in a dance Draco almost recognized. There was a black high-collared dress with threads of silver and red woven through it, so the deep black swirled always with hints of darkness and blood. No one was in it, yet the trailing gossamer fabric was filled out as if someone was, and the figure was familiar. The suit that danced with the gown was green and silver, with a half-cloak of blood red over one shoulder and a great goblin silver sword at his hip. His blood seemed to flow into the suited figure, so in a move so stupid it had to be the answer, Draco turned his broom into a dive and slammed himself through the dancing male figure. Reality shuddered as a hand of blood, far larger than a giant, reached out and seemed to snatch Draco Malfoy from existence. Minerva McGonagall whispered. Albus, is he dead? Professor Dumbledore sighed. I fear so, Minerva. The Hogwarts wards have just informed me that I have lost a student." Phileas Flitwick felt his hands white-knuckle on the wand that had failed him at last, for no magic of his would get him into the tower or pull his students out. At last he had a shred of hope. "You are incorrect, headmaster," spoke Professor Flitwick in a goblin growl. Dumbledore frowned, unwilling to accept any criticism of his own magic or supremacy in connection to the Hogwarts wards and magic. "How so, Phileas?" Dumbledore asked softly. Flitwick glared up at Dumbledore. "Do not so readily write off, Mr. Malfoy. My own wards tell me there is an intruder in Ravenclaw Tower and a boy in the girls' dormitory. 3 of the most powerful and knowledgeable mages of Europe looked upon the inverted tower of Ravenclaw and the twisted space that bent all magic and reality to hang both before their eyes and beyond all reach and side. Whatever happened, it would be beyond the power of anyone outside the tower to effect." 60. Chapter 60. Villains and Musicals. Phileas Flitwick was a master of charms, a champion duelist, and half-goblin. Given the power of his magical mother and the fury of his goblin father, he could have easily become a monster, a dark lord to rival Voldemort. He chose instead to embrace the wonder of magic, the joy that it brought to him. A childhood of being attacked for being different, and an adolescence of becoming powerful enough to make all his own years give way before him, and tear down those who thought they were above him, was balanced only by a core of Ravenclaws, and a few of other houses who had stood with him, beside, or sometimes even in front of him when he was too weak to defend himself, or he might have gone down a very dark path indeed when the true potential of his power became manifest. He made a mask. The cheerful, bumbling, slightly clownish figure he modelled off the even greater monster, Albus Dumbledore, who offered him a place to be a teacher, and stepped back from the path of blood and fury. Phileas Flitwick had lived his mask so long he had almost come to believe he was what he pretended to be, and not the son of a blood-soaked goblin warrior, and a witch who walked out of the Grindelwald battlefield too lost to battle for any wizard to dare. Now his Ravenclaw tower, the family he had run to when the goblins would not have a witch born, and his mother's family would not have a subhuman, was in danger. The mask was off. Phileas Flitwick and Minerva McGonagall stood before the mirrors created by the finest spell-crafters of the Ministry of Magic's Unspeakables, with security woven into it by the finest of the Ministry's security wizards, and by one of Voldemort's own apprentices in Barty Crouch. Phileas Flitwick slashed his palms with his wand, and ropes of his blood formed runes upon the mirrors, working the magic of the Gringotts Curse-breaker to subvert the mirror and take it for his own. Dumbledore cried out, "Blood magic is forbidden, Phileas. The Ministry will see you in Azkaban for this." Spells that took months to forge, and that drew power from the entire network of mirrors, lashed out in chains of hell-wrought iron, wrapped in the flames of fiendfire, and bound in the iron of Acheron that was made to bind witches. Minerva McGonagall met them. Where Dumbledore had been the power that everyone knew and feared, his apprentice of 50 years was Minerva McGonagall. The finest mistress of transfiguration in living memory, she had never sought political power, nor had she ever been drawn to competition and dueling as those who sought glory were. She was content to raise, protect, teach, and mentor generations of witches and wizards learning to become decent people in a land where magic offered both wonders and horrors, limited only by imagination. Transfiguration took the power of the unreal and drove it into matter that was real, and then through the power of the simplest of spells, simply opened it to the possibility of change. How much of that unreality you could control was a matter of innate talent, but what you could do with it was a matter of will and imagination. Masters of transfiguration were either completely humble or the very worst of monsters, because they understood that the truth of their magic was that they usurped the gods and chose to rewrite reality to their whim. Few witches or wizards had much capacity for the unreal. Few of them had enough raw power to make the power-intensive magics of enough use to ever train up, and fewer of them had the mental discipline and vision to truly hold the comprehension of what something was on an atomic level, and what you would will it to become with such perfect clarity that they could drive it to completion with such force that the object would hold the change for even an instant. Those with enough power could rewrite reality so deeply that it was not transfigured, but transmuted, forever becoming what the mage had willed it to become in truth. Minerva had always chosen to be humble, patterning herself off who she thought Dumbledore was. When it turned out the headmaster was not the man she thought he was, someone had to be. "They are our students, Albus," Minerva said, witch's hat on her head, wand in her hand, lightly as if it might break if she held it too hard. It seemed to dance upon her fingers, and reality firmed up around its length as Minerva McGonagall reminded Dumbledore why she was named for the Roman goddess of wisdom, craft, and war. Minerva McGonagall woke up and chose violence. Fiendfire raged forward and met a will that hated its existence more than Fiendfire hated life itself. She warped its flames into a different form of its own entropy. Soul and flesh-devouring flames became a corrosive acid that ate into the Acheron iron like centuries of decay in every second. The chains meant to bind even Voldemort or Dumbledore scattered over McGonagall's long skirts as so much dust in the wind. Lightning lashed out from the mirror to be caught in nets of copper spun from the air itself and bled harmlessly into the earth as McGonagall, and did the only thing she could do, bought him time. Filius Flitwick was bound to the very stones of Ravenclaw's tower. Those who took up the post of head of Ravenclaw seldom became headmaster, not because of lack of ability, but because Rowena Ravenclaw was jealous, and those who served as her proxies were bound to her tower, and its charges so deeply that other barns found little soul left free to bind. Flitwick loved his house as the only home he had, his wards as his children in magic and soul, and he loved with all the green and unreasoning fury of the goblin he was born. He sank his blood into those mirrors, and with it the barns that Flitwick had never once struggled against, but embraced. Flitwick drove those barns into the mirror with his blood and magic, and with a mastery of charms that showed the dangers of that most basic and least understood arts, wove his will and his barns into the very enchantments of the mirror, binding it no longer to the tasks of the Triwizard Tournament, but to the internal wards of Ravenclaw Tower through the barns of its master. The mirror showed the hellscape of Ravenclaw's tower, the inverted tower. Harry, Neville, Millicent, Hermione, Fred, and George had piled into the tower, drawn by the power of the runes that connected them to Draco and Luna, with Noodle reaching out with his own mind magic through the barns, woven in each of those bound through him, to Speaker Harry's gift of Parseltongue. Noodle opened for them a connection to Draco Malfoy as he soared his broom down a spiral of twisting space and time that seemed to separate the tower from Hogwarts and the rest of the world, in ways the many wizards and witches of the staff could not seem to breach from without. Blood flowed from Malfoy in a stream that should have already at least rendered him unconscious, but it led him like ribbon through the madness maze woven by fairy magic run wild with the power of the Yuletide, magnified by Ravenclaw's diadem and Lord Voldemort's will and rage. As Harry, Neville, Millicent, and Hermione began forming their circle, Millicent ordered Fred and George into the middle. Their runes were Jibo and Wanjo. The runes of gift and joy were also the runes that bound everyone together, the runes of harmony and unity. With them as the focus and Noodle wrapped around both, they could call the power of their own runes and elements and pour them into Draco and Luna. Luna's mind had always been open to the unreal, a power that had reached out and swallowed her mother when the spell she had been crafting asked more from her than she could give and survive. Luna had always hidden from her own power in the wonder of the unreal, of the beauty that magic made possible. She had hidden from the darkness of it. She had hidden from what her own rage and grief could make possible. She had hidden from her own power so deeply and so reflexively that she was unable to process the petty spite of her housemates and the bullies of other houses who chose to target her. She could not understand why they lashed out at her, but she could indeed understand what would happen if she lashed out at them, for the unreal answered to her call and was forever whispering of what it could do if she only reached out her hand and ordered it to become. Ravenclaw's diadem was a mental amplifier, the strongest mental amplifier ever made, and in it was a fraction of the darkest and most violent of all the Dark Lords in living history, driven far beyond any hope of control by an amplifier that had been magnifying his own rage and horror at being torn apart from his parent's soul in the moment of Horcrux creation. In a reflexive self-protection measure, the diadem of Ravenclaw had protected itself from Voldemort's control by magnifying the already psychopathic and sadistic soul's internal pain and rage beyond all hope if its own mind's control. Trapped for decades in an internal loop of trauma, Ravenclaw's diadem had made sure it was a weapon Voldemort dared not ever take up, for fear it would consume and destroy him, as it was consuming and destroying Luna. Given a mind to free it from the endless loop of its own severing, the mind of Lord Voldemort flowed into Luna with all of its rage and pain, seeking out Luna's rage and pain, but after so long in torment, not retaining enough awareness to shape a coherent thought of its own. Instead, it placed a sword of pure intent in the hands of a hurt child, while unleashing all the rage of 2 lifetimes into a mind that had been offered control of the wild magic of fairy, the wellspring of the unreal, and set loose in a tower of her tormentors. We all have thoughts we never let pass our lips, thoughts we aren't proud of, thoughts we like to believe were not really ours. Luna had never given her pain access to her power because the memory of her mother's death was written in her soul. The unreal, given the power of a witch's magic, could reshape reality, and the flesh of the living as easy as a child playing with Play-Doh. Voldemort's rage and Luna's trauma turned the dreams of Fairy into a nightmare of warping flesh, as Luna painted the truth of the souls around her in their own flesh and magic. Far from everyone suffered, for the tower housed some truly beautiful souls, and in the dreams of Luna, those souls shone like stars. Unicorns frolicked, nymphs and dryads sported as satyrs played pipes for the wild dances, as girls and boys, reshaped into beings of transcendent beauty, danced in joy as the magic roared through them, alive and awake to work their will and slightest whim. The inner court was bright and beautiful. All who looked upon Luna and loved her were transformed by that love into beauty and grace beyond measure. Beyond them raged the horror. The male prefect, who had never seen what went on in his own house, would be blind no more, as he was a single floating eye the size of wolf. From that eye rose 6 lesser eyes on stalks, and below the eye was a gaping shark-like maw. He was a beholder, a monster whose eyes could not simply see, but kill. The female prefect, who had always seen, but chosen not to act to keep the peace with the rest of her house, had paid for her lack of spine, with the loss of all bones. She was now a shambling mass of blob, endlessly spouting and consuming tentacles as it moved hungrily to take and consume anything living in its path. Twited creatures of fairy, some truly fairies, and some former students reshaped by the dark and ugly emotions that blossomed in them when they looked upon Luna, chittered and howled through the tower. Fangs, claws, and rage tearing at each other in the simple, uncomplicated joy of pain given and received, their inner nature written in their own flesh, and the wild magic of the darkest hours of the year dragging the worst darkness from every soul to make true. On her throne, Luna clapped and laughed, a smile upon her face, and tears of blood streaming down her face. Wonder and horror, punishment and victim, a goddess of beauty and torment, whose own innocence burned as fuel for nightmare made flesh. McGonagall and Flitwick froze in horror as the mirror showed what Ravenclaw Tower and its students had been transformed into. But with the mirror as a conduit, Harry and his ritual circle could reach Draco and Luna at last and funnel power into them. Noodle flinched back from the mind of Luna, for the dreamer was lost to the dream, but Draco he could still find, and he rode the connection woven so strongly through Fred and George, as their own runes of sharing and binding worked with the Arthala of family to connect all of those bound to clan and coven into one whole. Mind of Drac opened to Noodle, and while Noodle lost himself in the power, he strove not to resist as it drove into young Draco Malfoy, to allow him to wield the power of all the circle as if it was his own. He had little choice but to share with everyone connected to the circle everything Draco saw and felt. Harry and Hermione witnessed Luna's coronation through Draco's memory and frowned. Hermione finally muttered, "That speech, I swear I know that speech, but not from Hogwarts." Neville coughed. "Yeah, well, when we got the whole fairy elf thing going on here, I gave Luna my copies of Lord of the Rings to read. I'm pretty sure that is Galadriel's speech when Frodo offered her the evil ring thingy. Harry said musingly. I thought Galadriel didn't take it. Millicent laughed. Galadriel already had a tiara on. Every princess wants a tiara. Rings are kind of a low-tier accessory, but everyone knows the girl with the tiara is the princess. It's like offering a boy a magic sword. It's just not something you can say no to. Neville attempted to defend his choice. Look, it's a muggle book that deals with elves as being completely normal. I mean, even their witches and wizards are kind of muggly and don't really do much besides stroke their beard and mutter Dumbledore-ish hippogriff shit. I thought it would help keep her from getting weirded out by all the fairy stuff going on inside Hogwarts. Hermione asked, how is that working out? Neville watched Luna turn an attacking fire blast into a cloud of butterflies, and then with a flick of her wand, turn the attacking female prefect into what looked like a large blob with an endless supply of tentacles. Not well, Neville muttered. They watched Draco soar through what looked like some bad hallucination, like you get coming slowly awake after a bludger to the head, when they saw a strange scene. An empty black dress was dancing to ballroom dancing music of dark and haunting majesty. There was no one in the gown, but it danced anyway. Its partner was a beautifully crafted suit in green and silver with a blood-red half-cloak, equally empty. Oh, bugger, said Hermione softly. What is it, Hermione, what do you see? Asked Harry, knowing there was something going on he was missing. Hermione blushed and began babbling. Look, I wanted Luna to be able to get more grounded. I wanted her to see how you can see fantastic things and still focus on what is real around you. I took her to a few Muggle movies. Harry, already suspecting a trap, asked the question. Which movies? Hermione sighed. Legend and Labyrinth. I'm pretty sure the dancing gown thing is from Legend, where their version of a Dark Lord was trying to tempt the princess into turning evil, only she has made a dancing partner of roughly Draco size, in Draco colors, so I guess she's trying to tempt Draco to turn evil. Fred and George started snickering because on the edge of the abyss, with enough power flowing through them to burn out their minds with a moment's loss of focus, a joke was worth more than the risk of death. Short trip, said Fred, and familiar, said George. Harry shook his head. And Labyrinth is the one where David Bowie in tights is trying to seduce the goth girl by screwing with space, making up down, and sometimes sideways, making her fight through a huge maze to get to him, kind of like Task 3, so I guess this counts as Triwizard's prep. Hermione sighed. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Millicent screamed out tally-ho. As the on-screen Draco Malfoy tipped his broom and dove into the green costume, a flare of magic passing him through the final Ravenclaw outer defenses and into the dream. It almost ended as quickly as it began. A half-dozen Ravenclaw lower years, whose face and bodies had been twisted by fairy magic into the Fomorians of Celtic mythology, the misshapen humanoids all bearing features of monsters, but still able to wield wand and magic as they cast their spells to punish the intruder. At the lowest edge of Ravenclaw Tower, they were first and second years, and with his seeker reflexes and his training as a duelist, Draco was able to dodge or deflect most of the spells, while his own madly wove the strongest shield he could muster. A hulking third-year girl turned into a Cyclops, wielded a wand the size of a spear, and called out to him in a voice that sounded like a chorus of a dozen voices not quite in harmony. Turn back. You cannot have her. She is our now. The Cyclops said, then fired a powerful reducto that just about drained Draco's shield. This was stupid. He could no more fight all of Ravenclaw's tower than his father's peacocks could fly to the moon. He wasn't a hero, but Luna wasn't theirs. Rage, not heroism, welled up in Draco. He felt power burning into his runes, as if he had so much power he would burn out if he didn't use it. Spite, not heroism, drove him forward, his spells flowing in chains. Flipendo, Stupefy, Expelliarmus. He wove the knockback, stunner, and disarming jinx into a single flowing motion, and the third-year Cyclops was disarmed, having blocked and dodged the first two spells with ease. Luna is mine, Draco roared, unable to block and strike. He abandoned defense for full-on attack. He would last as long as he lasted, but he would die charging forward. Luna was his. They could not have her. With a flash of fire, a phoenix flashed into existence, and the world's least clean and least attractive wizard's hat dropped from its claws to land on Draco's head like so much dragon dung. Hogwarts has found its hero. The Sorting Hat roared. "Get off my head! You are ruining my hair!" shouted Draco, somehow finding time to worry about his hair as the smelly, interfering old had landed on his head. The damned thing left his hair alone when he was sorted. Why was it gripping his head so hard he could feel the hat literally ruffling his hair just to annoy him? A hero needs only three things: a stout heart, a good sword, and a sound track. The Sorting Hat cheered. "Sod off, you balmy beanie. I'm trying to survive here," shouted Draco as he dove to the ground, rolling beneath two cutting curses and a blasting curse to Flipendo, another charging student, into the path of two spells he didn't bother identifying and wondered briefly if they were survivable. These were the people who tormented Luna. He really could give a toss. Draco shot to his feet and found himself facing two fourth year with a dozen lesser years charging behind them. He felt the magic soar in his blood, like he could cast as fast as he could chant and never run out of power, but there were simply too many spells coming at him to dodge. Bleug! The Sorting Hat made a puking noise, and the sword of Gryffindor landed in Draco's left hand. Draco had been taught fencing by his father, forever curse his name, and drilled in foil, rapier, épée, and saber until he could fight competitively in the Muggle under 17 circuit, even when vastly underage. Without thought, he parried the spells with the blade, his brain understanding how futile it was to block a cutting curse with a blade. Fully expecting to die, he watched as the spell flashed out of existence as it met the legendary sword of Gryffindor and was consumed. Draco's moment of elation was crushed when the Sorting Hat opened its mouth and a female voice and instrumentals started booming out. "Where have all the good men gone, and where are all the guards? Where's the streetwise Gryffindor to fight the rising odds? Isn't there a white knight upon a fiery broom? Late at night, I toss and I turn, and I dream of what I need." Draco fought forward, wand and blade moving in a web of power and steel that turned the area around him into a dangerous and chaotic space where shattered magics tore away at those unprotected souls that dared to close within reach. Not all the things in Ravenclaw Tower had been left enough sense to fight with wand and spell. Some were reduced to fang and claw. Blood and viscera made the ground slick and dangerous under Draco's feet, but he could not spare a moment to worry if those were fairy creature or transformed students he cut through. There was only Luna and enemies, including the bloody hat. "I am not a sodding Gryffindor, you senile slouch cap. I'm a Slytherin." The Sorting Hat just boomed out its music as Draco pushed forward through a wave of transfigured Fernitru turned into golems seeking to smash him to blood and goo. The sword dealt with the golems, proving its edge could cut stone and wood as easy as it cut flesh, while Draco hammered a stupefy through the defense of the witch doing the transfiguration. "I need a hero. I'm holding out for a hero till the end of the night. He's gotta be strong, and he's gotta be fast, and he's gotta be fresh from the fight." Draco whipped the sword of Gryffindor down to meet the jinx of a first year who should have been about as dangerous to him as a fart in an open hallway. But the Sorting Hat's point caught his sleeve and delayed his counter long enough for the first year's spell to hit. "Tarrant Allegra," the first year's insectoid voice called, but the dancing jinx hit. Draco swore at the Sorting Hat as he felt the jink take over his legs, and Draco began dancing, still weaving sword and wand in his all-out attack. "Why the hell did you do that? Are you trying to get me killed?" Draco roared. "This is a musical number, idiot. You need to dance," shouted back the Sorting Hat unhelpfully. Draco had been learning the wild Cossack dances from the Durmstrang students, and they did include many saber dances, so Draco did not have to stop fighting to dance. He gave himself to the music of steel and spell, wand and will, and danced through the Ravenclaw students as the magic of his entire circle roared through his veins. "I need a hero. I'm holding out for a hero. Till the morning light, he's gotta be sure. And it's gotta be soon, and he's gotta be larger than life, larger than life." Spells howled off him, and things that he chose to believe were never students came apart under his blade and his spells. The only thing that lived in his mind, in his heart, in his soul was Luna. He would pay whatever price he had to, but he would get her out of this, no matter who it killed. Luna rose from her throne and stepped into her own dancing court. The bright, beautiful people without the darkness she bore inside parted for their queen, as if her movement had always been part of her dance. But the Luna who wept in the middle of her nightmare, and the Luna that raged in the middle of her revenge, were united in their fixation on Draco, who cut his way towards her. Somewhere after midnight in my wildest fantasy somewhere, just beyond my reach, there's someone reaching back for me racing on the thunder, and rising with the heat, it's gonna take a Superman to sweep me off my feet. Yeah, Luna lashed out with her wand. Incendio, the explosion of fire consumed the mad knot of figured, trying to make a wave of flesh to bring down the charging Slytherin. His own floppy-hatted body being the target of the explosion of fire that belonged in some Hollywood movie open field, and not in the confined corridors of Ravenclaw Tower. I need a hero. I'm holding out for a hero till the end of the night. Draco spun on his knees out of the flame, shooting back to his feet, then raising a wall of stone behind his back to trap half the defenders behind him and resume his charge towards Luna. Two witches with faces that bore too many eyes and teeth, and little else wove nets of conjured water and ice to trap and slow him. But now it was his turn to wield fire and steel to shatter the barriers of ice and water. He's gotta be strong, and he's gotta be fast, and he's gotta be fresh from the fight. Draco was lost in a cloud of fog as fire and ice annihilated each other in a storm of fog in which nothing could be seen but flashes of steel, and the cries of pain as Draco kept charging forward. Luna strode forward to meet him. I need a hero. I'm holding out for a hero till the morning light. He's gotta be sure, and it's gotta be soon, and he's gotta be larger than life. Luna called forth life from the stones, and in her madness, the stones gave forth vines of green with black dripping thorns and flowers of blood red, as she brought forth a wall of thorns to drag him down, bind him, and keep him safe. Safe from what she had become. I need a hero. I'm holding out for a hero till the end of the night up, where the mountains meet the heavens above out, where the lightning splits the sea. I could swear there is someone, somewhere, watching me through the wind and the chill and the rain and the storm and the flood. I can feel his approach like a fire in my blood, 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 like a fire in my blood. Draco pulled so much magic through him that his wand was burning his hand. Dragon heartstrings called for powerful wielders and lent themselves well to those who dared to walk the razor's edge of power and control. Draco was not walking it, he was dancing it. Thorns lashed at him like whips, but he wrapped himself in fire. He was not Hermione, so he was not safe. He felt himself burn, but channeled the pain into the sword, moving forward, every forward. The one thing on his mind was not survival, it was Luna. She saw him burst forth from the hedge, his flesh bubbling and blistering under the fire he wrapped himself in as his blade flashed to cut the last of the withering vines that kept them apart. Luna smiled. Even in her madness, she could not strike at him, her dragon. They would fall together in fire. She stepped forward, her wand held to the side. Strike me down, and you can save them all. Luna smiled that soft, wounded smile. The Sorting Hat shouted time to be a hero, boy. Draco staggered, only one eye still open, but enough left to see his target. The sword of Gryffindor rose, and Draco struck. Ravenclaw's diadem rang like a bell as Draco struck it. As it spun through the air, Draco used the last of his strength to turn his sword and catch the diadem on its point. As Draco fell, he drove the sword down, and with all his weight, drove the sword of Gryffindor down into the stone, pinning Ravenclaw's diadem to the stone of her own tower. Luna fell upon the ground beside Draco, stunned from the blow that struck her crown, not her neck, and found herself facing Draco's only remaining eye. Why? She asked. Draco smiled, for a horrible burned value of smile. I am not a hero. I don't save innocents. I am a dragon. I save wicked witches. She reached out to take his hand, and when their blood met, the magics that had woven them together since her coronation reached through Draco to reconnect to clan and coven. She no longer had the power of Voldemort and the tiara, but she was the dreamer of this dream, and the wild magic of fairy had been given her this night. She reached out for Hogwarts and her friends. The inverted tower reached out for Hogwarts, and the Hogwarts reached back. The castle rang like the deepest bell in the world, as the whole of the world trembled. Wards as far away as the Celestial Palace in Bejang and the Rainbow Rock in Australia chimed as sundered Hogwarts was made whole, and that which fairy had torn away was returned. The Madame Pomfrey led all the staff with any power to heal to deal with the wounded of the tower. The release of the unreal had returned all the transformed to their former state, but not all had been intact when returned, in body or mind. Not all the things that died had been fairy, and not all those that had been human could cope with the memories of what they had been when they returned. The Tower of Wisdom learned a lot about itself that night, and many of its lessons were bitter. The gifts of fairy are always double-edged, truth being the most terrible of those gifts. For once, the circle to cleanse Ravenclaw's diadem was not the most potent or even the most terrible of that night. When the fragment of Voldemort was ripped from the diadem, where Ravenclaw's magic had protected itself from Voldemort's soul by driving it mad, it barely resisted its destruction. Harry looked haunted, as for the first time he had to face a Voldemort soul fragment whose suffering had been so terrible it rushed to embrace the death Harry offered. For the first time, he was forced to remember Voldemort had once been a person. In the end, Harry Potter would be killing a man, not his body, but his soul. Harry looked upon the joy the tortured bit of Voldemort had at its utter annihilation, and wondered how much it would take for Harry to slip and become something as mad and dangerous as this. After all, the Tom of the Diary was more reasonable and arguably more ethical than half the officials of the ministry Harry had dealt with over his few years. Luna took the diadem of Ravenclaw and offered it to Phileas Flitwick, master of House Ravenclaw. Flitwick closed her hands around it and shook his head. No, child. I had been blind too long to what was going on in my tower. I knew what was going on, but saw no path to stopping it without becoming a worse danger myself. I have not earned that diadem, and do not trust myself with it. You will wear it, until the time comes you think it is not needed any more. Flitwick said softly. Luna smiled, and the sound of a sharp clang drew their attention behind them. Draco, stop this immediately. That is a priceless Hogwarts relic. Snape shouted, chasing a half-healed Draco who was chasing the Sorting Hat with the sword of Gryffindor. That is the sickest, most manipulative mind, violating music, making life, enduring moldy moth-eaten, stinking hair-mussing fashion crime in existence. And I will end it, Draco screamed and slashed at the hat, who jumped over it. I need a hero. I'm holding out for a hero. Till the end of the night, he's gotta be strong. And he's gotta be fast. And he's gotta be fresh from the fight. The Sorting Hat sang happily as Draco continued to attack it like the world's angriest swordsman facing the world's fastest toad. Severus Snape glared at Professor Flitwick, who smiled happily at his fellow housemaster as the Slytherin head of house chased his godson down and tried to stop him murdering one priceless Gryffindor artifact with another one. Fred grinned at George. So Draco Malfoy is Gryffindor's champion, George continued. Dumbledore will lay an egg. Fred cheered. Snape will have kittens. George snickered. His mum will go spare. They both cheered. Any other house, or honestly more mentally stable members of their own house, would be deeply offended that Draco Malfoy had been chosen by the Sorting Hat to wield the sword of Gryffindor. Fred and George, on the other hand, were the truest of Gryffindors. The House of Lions, the house of the brave, the bold, the not always bright, but always for the right. They understood. Heroes all belonged to Gryffindor. Even, or especially, the poncy, sneaky, slithering kind. Oh, they were going to tease him until his blonde hair turned red and they could finally call him the Slytherin Weasley. He was a Gryffindor now, even if he was Slytherin, and that made him family. As any Weasley could tell you, that meant that a certain amount of Fred and George was simply the cost of being family. Time to dig out that hair charm. He would be wary about it before, but if they couldn't turn a paranoid Slytherin's hair red to show they had adopted him against his will, then what kind of prankster were they? Ron might explode, of course, but that just made it funnier. 61. Chapter 61, Truth and Mirrors. Draco was not allowed to leave the infirmary. This was from Madame Pomfrey, because she absolutely got a triage scan on Draco when all the skin of his body had been burned almost 2 centimeters down, and the magic of his clan and coven had kept him alive. She understood that he absolutely could not be fine. This was from House Master Snape, his godfather, who had poured his most powerful healing potion into Draco's mouth while chanting spells in a face that was pale with sweat as he prepared himself to watch his godson die, and didn't. Magic had limits, and worst of all, magic had costs. Draco had broken both of them because he refused to let Luna be consumed by the diadem of Ravenclaw and the justice she finally brought to her tower. Draco had sworn to himself he would pay any cost, but in his heart of hearts, he never expected to live to face them. Wingardium Leviosa, Draco remembered. He would always now remember when he cast that spell. He had weathered a strong bombarder from a fourth year that collapsed his shield and faced some eye creature with eyes on tentacles like a crown on top. Beholder, the Ravenclaws had called it. All Draco knew is that each of the eyes on tentacles on top had cast a different spell, and it would be several seconds before Draco could raise another shield powerful enough to block any of them. The sword of Gryffindor parried in second, shattering the binding, and in a fencer's reflex he riposted, feeling the blade slide home in something he dared not look at. Something soft and wet that clamped around his blade as a sound like a startled cough sounded, and his wrist took the shock. Wingardium Leviosa, Draco had said, and with a flick spun the third-year girl he had disarmed, the one transformed into an ogress, into the path of the 5 spells coming from the beholder. She came apart, and Draco was sprayed in bits of her, but the larger chunks knocked those trying to grab him away. He exploded into a fletch, feigning a lunge to make the beast close its central eye, then slashing above in passing. Wingardium Leviosa, Draco chanted, flicking the enraged and half-blinded beholder into the students behind him. There were screams, but he didn't look. He heard, though. Draco had prided himself on the Malfoy noble heritage. His father had made him train in fencing to be a duelist with blade equal to his father. It was expected of a gentleman. Of a Malfoy it was expected to not only be better, but be casually better than any who he might have to humble with the blade. He learned the dances of the court of the nobility of a society the wizarding world had turned away from centuries ago, even as he learned the music and arts of a nobleman. Others forgot. Others were not Malfoy. The way of the blade, like the way of the wand, is the path of the noble Draco. Never forget Draco, they are beneath us. Everyone. There is only the truth of the sword, the power of the wand. You will teach the world with the edge of your blade and the fury of your spell that they exist only for your amusement, only for their use. They are nothing, Draco. You are Malfoy. Never forget that, and if the lesser do forget, with sword or wand you will remind them. Lucius had drilled into him, and Draco had smiled back at him in worship. Draco rolled from his bed and puked up all the remnants of the potions he had consumed until he could not puke any more. He remembered the feeling, the look in the girl's eyes. He thanked Merlin or the fairy, or whatever magic had warped her into something he could not recognize, because he could not bear, if he had memories of her alive, to go with the feeling of his blade lunging into her diaphragm, casually punching the deadly triangle where the wings of the ribs draw close to the heart. He had punched in and out before he could process, his other hand and wand flashing through a complex wand movement for a Protego Maximus. He lunged and watched as a girl trapped in a nightmare of magic she would never live to understand became a corpse and fell off his blade, and Draco became a murderer. He would always and forever see her twisted in human face, but at least he wouldn't know her. He was spared that. He would not cry. He was Malfoy. Merlin, damn him. Now he knew what it was, and the truth burned on his tongue like the bile that was all he had left to throw up. He knew the cost of the blade, of the wand. He knew what he had done, and he knew that if anyone threatened Luna, he would do it again. Draco felt he would go mad, felt a better man would kill himself rather than face what he had become. He was not, thankfully, a better man. Reaching into his belt pouch, he pulled out the little piano. Mother had insisted he bring it. Mother had insisted on his treating the music lessons and dancing as seriously as the sword or wand, when really, music was something you paid servants for, and dancing was something done to impress others. What need did Draco have to impress anyone? He was Malfoy, was that not enough? Draco took up his wand, fingers shaking, and tapped the piano 3 times. It grew to full size, a grand piano pushing out the screens around his bed. Turning, he reached out his fingers and began to play. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata fell from his fingers, the slow somber tones dripping from the piano like blood from his blade. Draco remembered as he played. He did what he had to. He chose Luna, and that meant he chose the cost. He played and he wept and he accepted it. He was Malfoy. His hands were never to be clean. Somewhere in the music there was a piece of something, something that he needed, something that made it no less terrible, but maybe just a little bearable. He would let none of them see it. Not Harry, who killed without thinking, not Neville, who could bear his weakness without shame, not Millicent, who laughed through a mask made of bone and screams, and yet somehow smiled. He was not strong enough to be any of them. He played, and the music went from soft to rising, as if somewhere in the sea of pain and shit it was somehow still okay. Luna was his. She would never see the price he paid. Draco played, and if he didn't heal, at least he stopped screaming. Somewhere beyond the screen, Luna lived, and when he pushed past the screen to see her, Draco would have his mask again. She was too gentle to see the evils in this world that left her the only one left who would look at him. He would protect her. Luna was his, and he was Malfoy. Several beds over, Luna lay and stared at Noodle. Her eyes were locked with his, and Noodle wandered the maze of light and wonder that was the mind of the dreamer, and despaired. Noodle mastered the mind arts the way no two-legged mammal ever could, and he could weave their minds back together if there were even two bleeding cells able to communicate. But he was lost. The one they called Luna was a dreamer, one who could see beyond the veil between the real and the unreal. A true dreamer saw what was, what is, what could be, what might have been, what must not be, all moving in an ever-changing sea in which their mind drifted. The more powerful they were, the deeper into dream they moved, and the harder it was to interact with those who only saw the one frozen moment of the now, one now, not the 100 or 1,000 nows that the dreamer dreamed, all as real to the dreamer, because she lived them all if she looked too close. She could always retreat from the now that hurt to find a better, kinder now. So many dreamers fled from the now they could not face into nows that were brighter, and turned away from the world full of people who may as well be portraits, for they only existed in a single dimension in her world of endless shapes, and in their blindness and ignorance marked her for the truth of a world that was, but they in their little frames and endless flat existence simply could not see. The dreamer had been traumatized, brutalized, and worse, had become the brutalizer. She had reached into the dream with the magic of fairy, the power of the diadem, and the rage of a dark lord, and she had woken the children of Ravenclaw to their own truths. For one shining and terrible moment, the dreamer did not accept the mockery of the flat little portraits on the walls, but torn them from their frames, and cast them into the dream to face themselves, and become what Luna always saw in them. The dreamer knew few of those that hurt her thought themselves wicked or cruel, petty or vile, and she was content to let them sleep in their ignorance, for their petty cruelties could be survived, as waking them to the truth could not. When crowned with the corrupted diadem on the night of endless darkness, on the night of Yule where the light was nothing but a memory, and tomorrow a heaven only the dead could reach, Luna had reached out and woken Ravenclaw from their sleep, and dragged them into the dream. Her inner court shone like stars, beautiful souls who dove into the dream and made wonders, following the endless and mysterious seas of magic, and might have been into a sea of knowledge that they drank until drunk and danced in the joy of it. The outer court was a circle of hell. Torn from the mask of flesh, their souls laid bare before their own magic. The power of the unreal filled their flesh until it was no more than clay, and the magic of each witch and wizard wrote on their flesh the truths they hid from, the lies they told themselves could not touch their magic. Everyone knew all the Death Eaters came from Slytherin. Everyone was like no one, a word people used that meant nothing. Ravenclaws studied the rolls of the slain Death Eaters and noted that half of the Death Eaters were Slytherin, a damning number that meant they were disproportionately represented truly. The other half, of course, were not Slytherin. Ravenclaws outnumbered Gryffindors, and so far outnumbered the Hufflepuffs on the rolls of Death Eater dead that you could almost give the Badgers a pass. The House of Eagles was second only to the House of Serpents for its Death Eater dead, and that did not spring out of nowhere. Ravenclaw was the House of Secrets, the house that understood knowledge was power, and power over others. Slytherin was the house that made lying to others an art. Ravenclaw was the house that made lying to yourself a survival strategy, for with enough self-deception, no means were unacceptable to get the ends you wanted, or sabotage another from reaching them. Magic is the power that binds wizards' oaths, for magic is born of intent. You put your will upon the world to wield magic, so before magic there can be no lies. Magic always knew you, and your magic always understood you. Luna blessed and damned Ravenclaw by letting them see the face magic knew was theirs. Many in the Tower of Eagles took that knowledge in their souls and fell back screaming. Noodle sought to bind the dreamer to a world she ran from because she could not unsee what she had wrought in Ravenclaw Tower, and being the only true Ravenclaw, she could never deny what she had done, or why she had done it. The dreamer damned herself, and Noodle could not call her back to bind her to this flesh, this place, this time when she had all of unreality to run to. Noodle slithered through a forest of wonder and jungle of nightmare, chasing a girl who wandered after butterflies with feet soaked in blood. Then the music started. Piano. As a snake, Noodle felt music through his whole body in a way that humans couldn't. He felt the magic stir as the yellow-haired dragon bled his pain into the music, and magic stirred in answer. The whole of the dream trembled as the slow movements of Moonlight Sonata bled Draco's shame and pain into the world, and from 1,000 might-have-beens, and 100 once-was stepped fragments of a dreamer. Lost in the dream, lost to the dream, but drawn by the music, the dreamer followed the music back to the world, a world she had put her hand upon and judged. Tears on her face, blood soaking her feet, the dreamer in 1,000 fragments came together, the sundered parts of her merging again and again, turning from unreality and its security for a world of blood and pain, politics and slander, malice and punishments. Dreamer ran her hands over Noodle as she walked from the dream, down the endless lines of might-have-beens to the place where a dragon wept upon a keyboard. She followed Noodle to the place of consequence and price, and she smiled as she woke. Luna Lovegood woke from her dream to hear Draco Malfoy playing piano. She had always dreamed of him playing for her, as she had dreamed of them dancing. Luna felt the tears on her face and looked down upon her hands. They were clean, and somehow that didn't seem right. Noodle looked at her, and she smiled. Magic had prices, and she would pay them. Her dragon had paid so much to bring her back. She would pay 1,000 times for the one who cared enough to follow her into nightmare and bring her back. She heard the headmaster, the minister, and the little pink-toed lady shouting. Sighing, she turned away from the piano music and rose to face a different kind of music. Elsewhere in the infirmary, Percy Weasley struggled to hold his girlfriend down. This was such an un-Percy activity, his own squeamishness worked against him as she got free. Penelope, it isn't your fault. That Lovegood girl used forbidden magic on you. Penelope was wild, her perfect control, the perfect control and emotional remoteness that actually formed the bond between them, two conflicted introverts finding solace in each other, was entirely absent from her. She laughed, and all the pain in the world was in that laugh. Percy flinched from it like fire, and Penelope struck like the eagle of her house. She grabbed her wand from the bedside, and it sizzled in her hand as it burned her. Penelope held her wand up before her, and tears fell from her face as it burned her hand until she dropped it. Holding the burned hand out to Percy, she screamed at him. Unicorn hair, 9.5 inches, a wand made for loyalty, one that rewards purity of focus and purpose with unmatched control and efficiency in charms. My own wand rejects me, Percy. Think about it for 1 second, Percy. You are not as stupid as your brothers. Do you think Luna Lovegood had the magic to transform 100 students at once? Flitwick couldn't do that. Dumbledore couldn't do that. Luna used whatever magic she tapped with Ravenclaw's diadem to open us to our own magic and let it reshape us. Penelope was wild now, her magic stirring about her in a storm, her hair rising like Medusa's snakes. My own magic judged me, spineless Percy. My own magic. I knew about Luna being bullied. I was her prefect. I simply judged the greatest good for the greatest number. I knew my duty to stop what was being done to her, and I simply decided my life would be easier if I let Luna be bullied, rather than confront a large number of my juniors over bullying they would then spend the next years trying to do around my best efforts. I judged protecting her a waste of my time, as her prefect. My magic judged me as spineless and made me spineless. I got to see how my own magic viewed me, a monster I would banish without a second thought. Now I reach out for my wand, and the unicorn hair in its heart rejects me. What did Luna do to me, Percy? She woke me up and showed me a mirror, and I am a Ravenclaw, Percy. I can't unknow it. Percy flinched. He wanted to shout at her, but how many times as a prefect had he followed that same thought into punishing his own, just to curry favor with outsiders? never daring to inquire about the merits of a case, lest it force him to act against authority instead of as its agent. Percy turned away from Penelope and stormed out of the hospital wing. He was a Gryffindor. He felt the brave part of him daring him to look into the mirror of his own magic and see what he saw looking back. Percy forced that thought down like he had so many times before. He had a future. He would be somebody important. He didn't have time or magic to waste on silly morality games. His own magic tugged at his hair, painful poltergeist he brutally suppressed. He had turned away from Penelope. He would turn away from his magic's judgment too. He felt the wash of shame and fought it down too. He would not be a noble failure like his father. He would not. At the doors of the infirmary Dolores, Umbridge stood with two auras at her back. "Stand aside, Professor. I have come to arrest the criminal Lovegood and take possession of the weapon used in the attack." Dolores Umbridge tried to hide the glee and greed on her face without much success, but she had the power as Inquisitor that Dumbledore had left vague and Crouch had left vague. She knew the ways of men of power. She was their deniability. She was the subordinate who would do what needed to be done without the noble gentleman ever having to give orders to do the dirty necessary thing. If she guessed right, and it worked, she would rise on their coattails to power her own meager magical skills, and less than stellar birth and academic achievement would allow. If she guessed wrong, she would be disavowed by superiors, piously insisting she had exceeded her authority. So far, Dolores Umbridge had never guessed wrong, and far better witches and wizards had been turned into stepping stones on her rise to power. Now her authority, since neither Dumbledore nor Crouch would define its limits, was whatever she said it was. Now her authority would allow her to take charge of one of the most powerful magical items in history. Dolores Umbridge would take charge of Ravenclaw's diadem, and with it she could make the Potter brat and his mudblood and blood traitor scum-hangers undo what they were told. The boy who lived belonged to the ministry. That Harry Potter happened to be that boy did not give him a voice or right to choose otherwise. It gave him a duty to be the tool the ministry needed to keep the public content. Dolores would make that happen. The Yule Ball was tomorrow, and the press that had been clamoring over what the mirrors had shown would need to be told something. With Ravenclaw's diadem on her head, she would make the little brutes say what she needed. Lovegood would go to Azkaban and feed her freakish dreams to the Dementors. Malfoy would heel like a good dog on a very short leash, or he would shortly do the same. This time, the Malfoy would be the minister's dog, not the other way around. Dolores Umbridge would make this happen. Minister Crouch would owe everything to her, and she would be the power behind the throne. All that stood in her way was this little subhuman. This half-goblin scum, lower even than his legal definition of half-blood, because his other half was lower than even a muggle. Phileas Flitwick had been having a rough night, 7 dead Ravenclaws, 12 in St. Mungo's for long-term mind healing, including his male prefect. Miss Clearwater looked to be in slightly better shape, but it was a matter of degrees. Now this pink ministry toady, who actually looked like a toad, had come for another one of his wounded eagle chicks. Flitwick's wand dropped into his hand as effortlessly as his father's sword had dropped into his, and his magic rose to his command with the same dark potency of his mother's. Phileas Flitwick looked into his soul where his fucks were grown and found that field was barren. Phileas Flitwick chose violence. "No," Flitwick said, and blasted the Hogwarts Inquisitor through her auras and into the wall behind. 2 auras drew their wands and looked down at the tiny little clownishly dressed man. A goblin grin, sharp teeth and blazing blue eyes smiled back as the 5-time European dueling champion, retired undefeated, stared down his wand and made a little motion with his other hand, palm up, fingers curling inward like coaxing a dog to come closer or an enemy to please. "Oh, please, 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 pretty please on a blood-soaked platter, please try to attack me." The first aura licked his lips. "Inquisitor Umbridge has ordered her arrested for the crimes of murder and assault, and the weapon used to be taken into her custody." Flitwick smiled. The entirety of Wizarding Europe saw what happened through the mirrors. Luna Lovegood did not kill anyone. The only person she struck was Mr. Malfoy, who both survived and refuses to press charges. As witnessed by everyone and verified by myself, Deputy Headmistress McGarnagle and Mediwich Pomfrey, the diadem was cursed and turned into a Horcrux, or soul vessel, by the Dark Lord Voldemort, and all the violence that resulted was caused by that soul fragment, a fragment which all of Wizarding Europe got to watch destroyed. Miss Lovegood bears no magical or legal responsibility. The Dark Lord Voldemort is already under a ministerial death sentence, which is unenforceable as long as he has more of these Horcrux. Ravenclaw's diadem belongs to House Ravenclaw and Hogwarts. Flitwick made a small flicking gesture with his free hand, his wand pointing at the second aura's nose tip unerringly as he dismissed the words of the first one. Inquisitor Umbridge is not in the DMLE, nor is she Minister of Magic. She cannot arrest even her own momentum, let alone my student. Amelia Bones, head of the DMLE, has already ruled the deaths by magical calamity, and thus not subject to prosecution. So again. No. Umbridge had collected herself and stormed between her auras. I forbid you to say Horcrux. The minister has declared they do not exist. I am Hogwarts High Inquisitor. By the authority granted me by Headmaster Dumbledore, I demand you hand over Luna Lovegood and the Ravenclaw diadem to my custody. Phileas Flitwick gave an odd hook-shaped motion almost too fast to see, and Dolores Umbridge was hanging upside down in mid-air, robes around her ears. With a rather louder than necessary chant, Flitwick cast Silencio to end her screams. Striding to the fallen purse, he pulled out her wand and left it some 3 feet below her extended right hand. Miss Umbridge, when you failed your charms, Owl, I told you that learning to summon your wand wordlessly, and of course windlessly, was the minimum standard I would expect of any Hogwarts graduate. Here is your wand. Should you wish to regain your dignity, your contact with the ground, or any semblance of freedom of action, all you have to do is complete your 5th-year homework. And again I say to the Toad, number, do not ask for what you cannot take. Facing the 2 auras, he smiled. You may note the maximum length of detention in Hogwarts under our charter is 2 hours. In precisely 2 hours, the charm will end, and your pet Inquisitor will fall a short but survivable distance to the ground. This is the medbay, so I do not perceive any serious risk. You may place a pillowing charm beneath her, but if you attempt to end the charm early, you will find yourself suspended beside her. The 2 auras had been outstanding charm students, of course, as expected from future auras. They had been among his better students. As some of his better students, they had spent the years after Hogwarts slowly growing into an understanding of just how powerful and versatile Phileas Flitwick had always been. Never had they stopped to really think about facing an angry Phileas Flitwick. Now that the thought crossed their mind, they decided they didn't like it much. Muttering under his breath, not because he couldn't cast it silently, but because the charm's master's wand was still pointed at a particular nose hair in his left nostril that had somehow offended the charm's master, the lead aura cast a cushioning charm on the stone beneath the Inquisitor's head and quietly slipped from the med bay. In Dumbledore's office, an argument was going on and not going well. I am headmaster, and I reserve the right to claim the sword of Gryffindor, Dumbledore insisted. I sang, holding out for a hero, not a headmaster, so no, the Sorting Hat said. I was the head of House Gryffindor, I have a right to that sword. Dumbledore argued. I sat on the head of Godric Gryffindor, and no, you don't. The Sorting Hat said, Malfoy isn't even in Gryffindor, it isn't right he holds Gryffindor's sword. Dumbledore shouted. Godric wasn't in Gryffindor either. I was his hat, but it took all 4 of them to enchant me. Not one of them ever asked me if they belonged in the house they founded. I will tell you Helga Hufflepuff was never more than 2 drinks from Gryffindor, and Rowena Ravenclaw could have ruled Slytherin House if she ever chose to. Salazar was a sneaky git, but he bled so much loyalty it should have turned into little badgers when it fell. Not one of the founders was exactly sane or proportional in response to protecting their own, and none of them ever asked me if they belonged in their own houses. Dumbledore took up the Elder Wand and snarled at the hat. I can take it if I choose. I am the most powerful wizard in Hogwarts, the most powerful in Britain. The hat frowned. It curled into itself, seeming to tremble in some sort of powerful emotion, then a fart so loud and thunderous that it should have come from no lesser bum than Hagrid shook the headmaster's office. and the Sorting Hat blasted right off its stand. The Phoenix squawked in horror at the smell and chose to die rather than inhale again. Dumbledore choked, covering his own mouth. The Sorting Hat roared from its new spot on Dumbledore's desk. "That is the most powerful in all Britain." The Sorting Hat laughed as Dumbledore blew out his own windows rather than opening them and cast a powerful enough wind spell that half his necessary budget paperwork soared out the windows as well. Glaring at the Sorting Hat in mute rage at the blatant disrespect, his own oaths and magic being bound to Hogwarts, Dumbledore could not actually strike out at the Sorting Hat. Chuckling, the Hat mused to himself, "Awfully glad I don't have trousers after that one. Honestly, Godric, what did you eat?" 900 years of fermenting, can't help of course, but still that was pretty rank. Haw haw haw. The Sorting Hat laughed as the headmaster tried to remember breathing was worth the cost of that lingering smell. "Hands off the sword of Gryffindor, headmaster," the Sorting Hat said seriously. Godric wasn't the greatest wizard Hogwarts ever held, but he never made a mistake with a sword. Never came close to making a mistake with that one. Gryffindor wants that sword right where it is. Dumbledore looked at the ugly old hat, the foolish, foppish, ridiculous hat that sang such terrible songs every sorting year, and realized it wore the same clownish mask he had crafted for himself. For the first time, Dumbledore realized he shared an office with a monster older than he was, and no less terrible. He sat down and stared at the hat and began to think. Looks like sleet soon. Scotland in December, Ruddy always looks like sleet soon. Still, weren't those the papers for the budget meeting after Yule with the Board of Governors? You know, the ones you banished out the window. The Sorting Hat asked kindly, then hopped back to his post, while the headmaster frantically tried to sort his necessary parchment from all the scraps of parchment littering the grounds of Hogwarts somewhere roughly, that way, as the wind blew. Sometimes it was fun being a hat at Hogwarts. 12 Grimold Place, Sirius Black dodged the teacup flying at his head, and the stinging hex aimed at his ass. "This is all your fault, Sirius," Narcissa shouted. "How is this my fault? I barely said 50 words to Draco when we finally talked." Sirius insisted, watching as Creature handed Narcissa a saucer, which he admitted worked like a shuriken in Sissy's hands. "They were clearly the wrong 50 words, Sirius. Stop dodging and take it like a black." Narcissa shouted, waving her wand and banishing 20 cups and saucers at Sirius, who shielded against them, only to catch a nasty curse that lit his chest hair on fire under his clothes, because of course the cups and saucers were just to trick Sirius into trusting a shield to defend him. Sirius pulled the fire to his wand and shot it at Creature. "Stop helping Narcissa, you traitor," Sirius shouted, dodging a grave boat that wobbled enough to be tough to dodge and caught him in the shoulder. Creature aids the noble Lady Black in correcting the Lord Black's heroic insanity, insisted Creature with a smile, showing how deciding this was for Sirius' own good. Allowed Creature to assist Narcissa's hunting him with expensive china. "Remus, help me," Sirius shouted. Remus sat back in his easy chair and sipped tea. "You are doing splendidly, Sirius. Keep it up. Go Gryffindor, rah-rah," Remus said helpfully, waving his old Gryffindor Quidditch flag helpfully. Narcissa held 4 teacups suspended in mid-air and banished one with each word at her cousin and lord. "This is your fault," Narcissa pronounced, spread his arms and took the impacts, staring into Narcissa's angry eyes with his own rising ire, his power gathering about him in a dark and dangerous pool. "Explain yourself, Narcissa," Lord Black commanded. "I had to watch my baby charge into certain death, knowing it was certain death. I watched him burn Sirius. I watched my baby burn, and he still kept fighting. I had to watch him burn Sirius, and I couldn't even raise a wand to help him, and it is all your fault." Narcissa shrieked and threw her wand at Sirius, who took her in his arms and held her awkwardly. Sirius tried to defend himself. He did all that fancy fencing that Lucius got all pantsy about in his tight white fencing uniforms, like some sort of muggle who forgot they invented guns. I don't know, like 5 centuries ago. "That is totally Malfoy, not my influence at all." Narcissa slapped him. "Lucius trained Draco to use his sword to humiliate and kill inferior opponents, the same way he used his wand in carefully controlled and instigated duels that were closer to assassinations than anything else. Lucius Malfoy neither knowingly entered a fair fight in his life, nor trained Draco to. That was some heroic Gryffindorish bullshit, and you are to blame." Narcissa shouted. Sirius chuckled. Yeah, I give you that. Draco got his balls from the black side of the family. That was some glorious Gryffindorish bullshit. Charged the tower, sword and wand, conquered Ravenclaw and claimed his princess, tiara, and everything. Narcissa dug clawed hands into Sirius' arms. He's all I have, Sirius. All that I have left in this entire world, and I had to watch him go to his death on a Morgana-be-damned mirror. Sirius thought about Harry, and his heart clogged on the pain and despair that Azkaban had written in his bones. The helplessness tasted too familiar. He gripped Narcissa, pulling her in and holding her until the sobbing stopped. I will talk to him, Narcissa. What he did was amazing. There weren't a dozen of the old crew of Auras in the last war that could have equaled it. You should be proud of him. I will talk to the boy, teach him how to handle those black balls of his now that they finally dropped, without getting himself killed. No sense winning the princess if you don't get to enjoy your happily ever after. Sirius smiled as he looked down at Narcissa and smiled. Not a dozen of the old crew, closer to half a dozen if he was honest. James Potter, killed in action. Frank and Alice Longbottom, worse than killed. The Prewitt twins, also killed in action. Mad-Eye Moody, still alive but hardly a poster boy for mental health, and Sirius Black, who made Mad-Eye look like he was coping well. He would do his duty. Draco was not goblin-raised like Harry. What he had done would not be easy to process, not be easy to cope with. Dumbledore's second chance bullshit was toxic, was poison. Tell children that killing is always wrong, and then send them out to fight your wars. How many of the old crew drank themselves to death, took a wrong potion, or ate their bloody wand because an old man told them that anyone who killed was evil, and then sent them out to do it for him. Morgana's tasty left nipple. Sirius Black might be the closest to sane of any of the survivors of the last war who can teach Draco and the other kids how to live with what they were going to have to do to survive. Now Sirius felt the old Azkaban shakes break through his control, as Creature was left to watch a shaking Lord Sirius Black hold a weeping Narcissa Black, and the half-sane House Elf smiled. House Black would survive, whatever the cost. Rita Skeeter sat with Hermione Granger, and her quill danced upon the page as she endured a Hermione and Fodump with the fierce intelligence and predatory instincts that had clawed her way to prominence in a profession sharks would be afraid to enter. Periodically she would stop and stare mutely at Neville Longbottom, who would dumb Hermione speak down to a level a reasonably talented witch or wizard could at least grasp the outline of. What she was hearing was terrifying. Voldemort was not dead, in fact could not be dead while these Horcruxes still existed. There were several. Voldemort was coming back imminently. The whole Triwizards tournament was a trap designed to put Harry Potter where Voldemort could harvest him like a potion ingredient to make a new Dark Lord body, to do Dark Lord things, to a wizarding Britain succeeding ministers of magic, and Albus Bloody Dumbledore had turned into helpless and unprepared sheeple rather than admit that really. The good guys choosing violence, while the bad guys were not ready to murder them all, was a good idea. She could not print this. She knew people that had disappeared, and she did not mean into Azkaban or running overseas, but disappeared from trying to print things like this. Turning to Harry, she asked him, "What do you expect me to do with this?" Harry grinned. "Come to Yule for yet another scandal of the year. Got to get one more in right. Only a week and a bit left. I promise you that the first dance will sell more papers than the second task did." Rita blinked, but Millicent chimed in. "What Hermione told you, you need to know. When the third task ends in Nightmare, you will have one chance, and one chance to get the truth out before Voldemort and the Ministry go to war. When the dust settles, all wizarding Britain is going to remember is the one voice that told them what was coming." Millicent said, as the implications of that began to sink in. Harry grinned and punched Rita lightly in the arm. "So get the story ready. When Baldivaldi comes back from the not all the way dead ready to kill everyone with a better nose than him, we need you ready to get the story out before the Ministry can even figure out what stupid thing they want to believe." Harry quipped bitterly. He turned serious then. "And don't die, Rita. Seriously. If you die, you will miss the good part. I promise you, Rita, if you live, there will be a good part." Rita saw something in Harry's eyes then. There was a smile on his face, but his eyes were old, so very old and so very tired. There was a very long night before the dawn, and Harry would have to drag them the whole of the dark night if anyone wanted to live to see that distant dawn. Suddenly, Rita felt the cold sink into her. The false smile, the mask she created and lived so long cracked, and the witch behind it looked into Harry Potter's eyes. Not Rita Skeeter and the boy who lived, but a witch and wizard standing at the end of the world and pledging to see each other on the other side. She nodded, packed her quill away, and returned to Hogsmeade. She would buy a potion of dreamless sleep, she thought. What her dreams would be tonight is something she was too honest with herself to want to know. One chance to be the voice remembered in history, the one voice that shouted the truth when it still might matter. Now all she had to do is not die, and her words would live forever.